remember buying a.
No, I've never
I remember buying
actually
appliances there, and I bought
gone
like
to Cannon Street before.
real when they had real.
Yeah, there's different things that are going on. It's like the rest of Cambridge. Like this is a gorgeous street revival house.
How are you, Jeff?
Good. For you.
Sorry,
So which relative did you like?
I don't even remember now, but I remember that. And then, shortly after Christmas, recently, like in January 3rd or Thanksgiving.
Sure. It takes 4 or 5 months to make it.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty slick.
So why aren't you guys building something like that?
It's funny how some of these things, like, I remember, you used to think of Bleachman was way out there in the middle of nowhere. Way, you think of the design center way out there in the middle of nowhere.
And now you're next door.
And now you're there, you know, it's all part of the seaport.
Hurdle. Jumping around.
Just don't fall.
You good on your feet? All right. All right. Hurt yourself.
Similar to
First Street P&G is building a retail building. It's more or less replacing the entire process. One story. Tall. It's kind of stuck, so you want to make it worse.
Yeah, we're gonna maybe start there.
Thank you, sorry.
No, it was up there, I think.
What I was gonna say. I figured I have to like the whole thing.
Oh, no.
Get them on. Stuck in them on.
Okay. We're going to call this meeting to order. We've got everybody here from the planning board and the proponent, and so we will get started. First up is Jeff. Are you giving the update tonight for us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm happy to do that. Iram and Khalil both out this evening. So just do a quick rundown of what's coming up. Today we have a zoning petition hearing you'll be hearing all about. We also have some very exciting sign variance applications to review. Next week, the next meeting of the Planning Board will be March 26th. We are going to have a hearing, it's a continued public hearing, on the accessory apartment zoning petition. This is one that the board might recall had already had a hearing and made a recommendation on. You would have assumed that it's gone away, but it's not. It's coming back because there were some changes to the petition that were made at the ordinance committee hearing, and it was determined that it made sense for those changes to come back to the planning board to look at again. So that's what we're going to do next week. That's the only public hearing scheduled. We are planning, as a matter of general business, to provide some updates on the Envision Cambridge process. The process, of course, is completed. The reports are in the final drafting phase, and because there was a little bit of time after that public hearing, we thought it made sense to give a little update, probably focusing on Alewife. So those are the only hearings we have scheduled. The next regular meeting is April 2nd, but there's no hearings scheduled thus far. We do have some cases coming that will be scheduled at some dates. On other items, we have other city council committee meetings. We have Wednesday, tomorrow, a meeting of the housing committee of the city council to talk about the affordable housing overlay concept. The purpose of tomorrow's meeting, it's at 5 p.m. at the Sullivan Chamber. The purpose is to hear public comments, and then there'll be a continuation of that housing committee discussion on March 28th. That's Thursday of next week. Next week, on March 27th, there'll be an ordinance committee hearing on the petition for the Industry B zoning district to increase the allowed density for hotel uses. The planning board made a positive recommendation on that. April 2nd is when the ordinance committee will be having an additional public hearing on accessory apartments. And April 3rd is when the ordinance committee is going to be having their hearing on the Cambridge side site zoning petition, which you'll be hearing tonight. One other meeting that's happening on Thursday of this week is the Climate Resilient Zoning Task Force. We're going to be doing a walking tour starting up in Alewife. I know Ted and Lou are going to be there as members of that committee. And one final update that I'll give is that we've been working for a while on some improvements to our web page in terms of how planning board special permit case materials are organized and presented. We just launched the updated web page. So if you go now to www.cambridgema.gov/special permits, you can now search for cases by address, as well as by case number. You can look at what the status is of all the various cases that are being reviewed, and you can also click to a map, an interactive map that you can use to kind of pan across the city and look at where different special permit cases are located. We are very proud of this new site, and we hope that, and as planning board members, you're probably going to be, at least those of you who get your materials electronically, are probably going to be the ones using it the most, so we certainly welcome any feedback. So I think that does it for updates.
Thank you very much. We have a transcript ready for adoption from December 18th, and it's been certified by the stenographer as complete. Do I have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
Second? Thank you. All those in favor? Excellent. All right. Then we'll move to our first public hearing of the night, which is a zoning petition for Cambridge Side PUD 8. Mr. McKinnon, are you going to kick us off?
We are. I'd like to do
All right.
just that. Thank you, Chair Conley and members of the Planning Board. My name's Rich McKinnon. I live at 1 Layton Street here in Cambridge, and I'm a development consultant to New England Development. As Jeff said, we're here tonight for the Cambridge Planning Board public hearing on the PU8 zoning petition filed several months back. We filed this because obviously we think we need it in order to be a healthy part of East Cambridge for the next quarter of a century. If I may, I'd like to introduce members of the team that are here with me from New England Development, Steve Karp and Sarah Lemke and John Tuhig. And then our architects on the project from Elkis Manfredi is David Manfredi and Brian Rossler. And then our attorneys, who we've had since the inception of this project many years ago, but they haven't been these two individually that long. Tim Sullivan and Jessica Camano, both here from Goulston and Stores. And so with that, we'd like to begin, if we may, our owner, Steve Kopp from New England Development.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. It's a real opportunity for me to come and reminisce a little bit, but also to talk a little bit about the conception of what we did here and how working together with the city, we created a project that over the last 30 years has had an impact on certainly on Cambridge and certainly on our lives. So, so I'd like to give you an idea, and I think the first slide is they pulled this together the other day and showed it to me for the first time in a long time, and we've all changed a little bit, and we laugh about fashion, but up there on the right hand side is fashion, and I had darker hair in those days, and even had a little more hair, but so it was a different era. So we have a little change, and so if you go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this whole thing kind of started, and where we are today, and why we're here today. And as a kid, I grew up in Medford, and I used to take the bus to go in town, and I changed to Leachmere, and so I kind of know this neighborhood from many years ago, and so always was thrilled with the opportunity to be able to develop this project over here, the Cambridge Side Galleria. When we first looked at it, and I guess you can see it, the picture over there, that there were just parking lots that were here. Was even a casket factory, as some of you may remember. The body shops, the industrial buildings, and the original Leachmere, and Sinesta was parking some cars there. We went out and we acquired several different parcels at the time and put together a plan. And at the time there was no PUD4, so there was a little bit of risk on what we wanted to do. And my original plan that I came to the city was as a two-level mall, because we acquired everything within that dotted red area. But working with the city, there were certain criteria that they were concerned with, and things that we had to work together to kind of figure out. They needed some land to make the canal, and so we donated some of the land. And people say, well, why is the curve at the end of the mall the way it is? And that was so that it would be along the canal, and it would have the same curve as the canal, and some of the land was there for the canal. And on the other side of it, there was the land that we dedicated for the park, and my two-level mall was going to go right down through where the park is right now, but I was convinced in the meetings that we had that there should be a road going through there, which is now Cambridge Side Place, which divided the property. So now as a developer, I really had a problem, because this was very condition, the conditions that we agreed to were one, the anchor on one end was a canal, and the other end was a park, and that's where you would see a department store. And to make it even worse, we agreed with the city that we'd have a street going through the middle of it, but it would be a closed street so that people would have public access and to be able to walk through in a covered environment. And so people often ask, well, why didn't the department stores have access to the first floor of the shopping center? And that was part of the reason, because there was no access. And so that's why the original Leachmere was on First Street, and Sears was on First Street, and Feline's actually came a little bit later, and unfortunately they didn't have an entrance on the first floor, and so they were always on just the second and third floor, and that's how the project came to be. And the street has worked out really well, and obviously it's used by a lot of people, and as the park has, and as the canal has. So things have changed a lot, and we can probably go to the next slide. We built this kind of together with the city and with the planning and the planning department, and you know, Dennis will correct me. I guess he's here someplace. If I forget something, and I'm sure yeah, probably will. But we try to implement the East Cambridge Riverside Plan, and this was really a true mixed-use project ahead of its time, because we had an office use on the plan. We did the Lotus building. We obviously the hotel was part of our plan, and then the retail was part of our plan, and then there were 2 housing developments that were part of that original plan. But if you look at the, and you have up there, it became kind of a signature for the community, and we kind of worked hard with the community during the last almost 30 years to make it a community event place. And it's really 6 levels, because 3 levels are below grade and 3 levels above grade. People said you must have been crazy to try to build 3 levels of parking below the Charles River, but it was impossible to do it at that time. So why don't we go to the next slide? Then retail has changed, as everybody knows. The impact of the internet has had a tremendous impact on retail. Third level retail is really difficult retail. Assembly Row opened a lot of outlet stores. Some of the stores that we had in the mall, they opened outlets, so that hurt this mall. A lot of the stores that got hurt the worst were on third level. So, as you know, we've been back. This shows that we spent $35 million renovating the mall, making it more modern, more vibrant, and making a lot of changes in it. When we want to make the commitment to keep the retail here because it's vibrant and it's important for the community to have that. So the 3rd floor, if we can go to the next slide, these are the renderings of the new 3rd floor of the mall, and we have office space that will be going on the 3rd floor. We have a new entrance on 100 Cambridge side, which many of you, I'm sure, already know about. You've seen a lot of these plans, so we won't. I won't bore you and go through all the details of it because I know we're limited in time. So where do we go from here? We can go to the next slide, okay? We have over 90 tenants that we have to protect, and by protect I mean we're going to activate First Street, and David Manfredi will go through the plans to show you how we do it. I put together this little plan with these little wiggly lines on it and everything, because it kind of tells a little bit in detail of what we were talking about, what we're trying to create. You know, that having the road go through Cambridge Side Place, when you look at this plan, how obvious it was to do that. And you can see where the park is. And if you go from the canal through the mall, through the park, across to another park, it's to the river. If you look around the canal, and you can get to the river on both sides, and we have some ideas of how we can kind of activate that a little bit more. And so we'd like to have the opportunity to do that in the future. It was a mixed-use development in the beginning, as I mentioned, and will continue to be that. And we want to strengthen all the connections to the neighborhood and to the riverfront, and continue to be part of the community. But we have a lot of challenges. You know, I know that you see a lot of plans, and a lot of plans, you know, have individual buildings. They really have something as complex as this. But it's very, very difficult to kind of build the type of project that we're going to describe tonight, and to keep the retail vibrant, active, and continue to go, and be safe, and be the type of project that people want to be in. And we're changing tenants all the time and trying to keep the best tenants and trying to make it vibrant. And the opportunity to tell about all these other uses that's going in there is something we're really anxious to be able to talk about. So the customer experience is really important. When you think about this from a planning point of view, one of the major problems we have is, you know, loading and keeping the retail stores active, and how do you get into those stores, and how do you load the stores, and where does the garbage go, and how do you all the things that goes with running a major retail complex. Yet you're building around it, and so there's going to be a lot of changes, and these changes, each one of them will have an impact on it. And David Manfredi will talk a little bit about that. The other thing, the cost of doing some of these things are a lot more than if you're just building in an open area, because we have to keep the parking underneath it. So when we're building these buildings, we have to build down through the parking, the foundation costs, and the changes and the structural changes and everything. And David will talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. So it's some of the things I hope you kind of keep in mind when you realize the difficulty and the planning that's gone in to try to do what we're trying to do here. So I think that the end of the evening, I'll try to talk a little bit after Doug goes through the plans, and we go through some of the things on what we're talking about doing with the zoning, and we hope we'll be able to answer the questions that you have. And we hope this is the first of several conversations we can have to get to a plan that we can all feel very proud of for the next 30 years. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John Tewig, who's going to talk a little bit about the zoning framework. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. I have the unsexy, uninteresting part. Dave Manfredi gets the great imagery and hopefully some of the things we're going to show, and we can talk later and answer any questions about the model. But they said you have 5 minutes to talk about the zoning bylaw that you submitted and get it done. Well, and by the way, as Steve went through, is when we've had, as you might imagine, many a meeting on sort of the goals and sort of the challenges that Steve just talked about. How do you meet those? How do you draft a zoning bylaw that's going to allow us to do those things that we found were important to meet the goals, meet the challenges, but also going to meet the design, something you design today. We've had a very good run, 25, 30 years. How do you design something that we're going to be able to take forward? And that was really the test. How do you create that zoning framework? So what are we going to talk about in the 5 minutes that they asked me to speak to? Well, two things, I think. A series of questions. Where is it? I'm going to show you that, and that's part of the materials. What is needed to qualify for it? What's the process we're going to use for this new zoning? How does it compare to what we have now? How does this proposed PUD 8, at least on a high level, compare to what we have today in the PUD 4? And then why does this zoning petition that we're asking you to support and ultimately the City Council to vote for, how does it meet our city planning goals? Now, you received a very good, we thought it was a very comprehensive, very good report from the department. Covered a lot of these issues. We just thought to highlight some of these things to give you an overview, really, of the zoning might be helpful as we walk through. Not in any way to, really just to supplement, not really to replace what you've already seen in the memo. Again, we thought it was a very sort of thoughtful and comprehensive piece. Well, the first one is, where is it? Well, it's a portion of what the PUD4 was in the same area, about 8 acres. As Steve mentioned, we had other parts before, Lotus Building, office, hotel, that is not included in that. It's really, if you think about it, if you know the building, it's the core retail, which we have to protect, and was critical as we thought about our sort of our goals and challenges. The Sears Building, the upper parking garage, the Lechmere Building, and yes, I am dating myself by calling it the Lechmere Building, but the Lechmere Building, for everyone else, it's where Best Buy is, and the Macy's Building. That's really that is what is covered by this PUD 8. So that's the district. That's in the filing. That's actually an attachment to the zoning bylaw. What do we need to qualify? When we talk to people, people are very concerned that the core retail remain, that they wanted to know that if we were going to have an opportunity to create a mixed-use project that might have office and other commercial uses, that it was going to always have some type of core retail to it. So when we started to think about sort of, what you would call it, eligibility, or what do you have to do to qualify, the thinking was always to have ground floor retail was a requirement for that. Also to have a parcel of some size, 7.5 acres. So you had to have a parcel of size. And then it had to be proximate to and connected to the open space. So as when you look through the zoning, and this was as part of the report, those were sort of 3. You don't even get into the opportunity to be able to move forward unless these things exist. So where is it? What do you need to qualify? The third part, process. People say, well, you're here tonight, you must be going through a process. Obviously not the planning board, but people say, well, how do you do this? It's obviously the adoption of the PUD 8 zoning petition, which starts here tonight, continues with through ordinance, ultimately with the city council. It is truly the setting the rules of the road, how we can go forward. But we also wanted to have a very robust special permit requirement because people care very deeply about this space. You can look at it in the picture that's to the right. Again, maintaining our core retail, and then the Sears, the Garage, the Lechmere, and Macy's. How does this all work? How does it work in relationship to the canal? How does it work with the public open space? So the things that we included, and this was part of the laundry list, site development plans, massing plans, things that show the architectural character, all have to come in as part of a special permit application. So set the rules of the road, allow us to come in with a special permit application. Connectivity and open space, to have plans that really demonstrate how that's going to work. The ground floor, and so the activation of that ground floor. David is going to talk about First Street. When we were in the community, the first thing we heard in every meeting, we heard it when we talked about the third floor. We heard it about when we talked about the renovation. We hate First Street. It's not active. It puts a blind sort of wall to the rest of the community. How do you open that up? And we're going to show you some imagery, and also the zoning allows that and actually makes that a criteria and a requirement as part of our special permit. Housing. Different than maybe 30 years ago, a discussion about housing and so we have put in that 20% of the net new area would be housing and 20% of that would be affordable, so that's in our bylaw. Phasing, how would you phase it? This is not going to be all built at the same time. Steve talked about the challenges. How do you keep this loaded? How do you keep the lights on? How do you keep the tenants happy? How do you make it safe? Because our goal here is we are not going to close the mall. We're going to keep it open at the same time trying to bring more activation to it. Parking. We're talking about taking down the upper garage. You're going to want to see the information with respect to, we still have 1,700 spaces underneath. That's going to remain the below level garage. How does that work? The good news when we present that to you ultimately in the special permit, we happen to have 20 years of data by hour of who parks there and who has parked there for the last 20 years. Now what you see is actually, and what we will eventually show you, is a line that goes down like this. It just sort of is the nature of what it is. And our parking that is in the report and what we filed really focused on sort of what today's numbers are, the 0.8s, the 0.9s as it relate to office and other related use. Loading, obviously show you a loading plan. Sustainability, again, you wouldn't talk about that 10 years ago. Today it's so critical. Resiliency, those matters, requiring those environmental reports to be part of any filing that we make. And then finally, comprehensive signage. Signage has always been a big issue in Cambridge, and at Cambridge side, how that signage works and how this program integrates. So really where it is, and then what is the process to obtain it after we've determined that we're eligible, that we're maintaining that core retail. How does it compare? Again, this chart is actually in your materials. It's in the report, which we thought was a very good and useful chart from the planning department. The allowed use is very similar to what they are today. You'll see one change, and you'll say, well, why did you change that? We did add in light industry, and it's somewhat because of the definitional changes that we're running into in the industry today. Amazon is sometimes, even though they may have retail categorized as light industry because they may have fulfillment. So we were looking at some of the definitions. We did add that in. Gross floor area, again, a little bit different than what was filed originally, the PUD4, because it included other parcels. What's noted in the report is 766,000 as the existing. That didn't include the 270,000 associated with the garage because it's a little bit different definitionally than it would be today. But what we're really talking about is adding additional net new 625,000 square feet, which is really some of the elements that would go to the anchors. If you think about this as a redevelopment project, it's a redevelopment project of maintaining the core retail, but then taking what traditionally would be the anchors, and we have to change those commercial anchors because the reality of our long-term viability, look at Sears elsewhere, is not with, and we talked about this when we talked about the third floor, having traditional retail or just leaving retail there. That's not a long-term opportunity for us. Height. Height is different. Height was 85 feet under the original approval. We're showing 3, and it's in your report, as you step back from the canal, 85 feet plus 50 feet to get you up to 135 plus 50 feet to get you to 185. It's stepping away from the canal and allowing a higher height element. Most of the center, and certainly the mall, is not changing in its height, but what one would term years ago our anchor stores are changing. Residential use, as far as minimum residential use, that wasn't an issue. We're showing, as I said, 20% and 20% for affordable. Minimum lot area per dwelling unit, we have 7.5 acres. That's sort of a required. We didn't state a minimum in that. We didn't think that was necessary. Required setbacks, same provision that exists in the PUD 4. Minimum open space, same provision that exists today in the PUD 4. So that gives you just and again, very briefly, just a quick overview of the comparison. So taking you through, why does it meet the city planning goals? Why should we be able to, and what are the criteria as we bring this forward for approval? Well, I call your attention to the city planning studies. We spent a lot of time, David, his group, all of our planners, looking at all the different types of plans that are out there, whether it be the riverfront plan, the overall planning study, the updated riverfront plan, the plan for the square, Envision Cambridge, and thinking about, and from that, and talking to people in the community, what should be the criteria that allow us to go forward. It has to be a mixed-use project. It has to have ground floor retail and activation on First Street. It has to improve the neighborhood connections that you have there today. High-quality streets and open spaces. David will show you. Again, my part isn't the sexy part. David is, and he's going to show you some of these images that we think really do achieve some of these things. How you relate to the open space. Having a strong street edge. David will show you First Street and others. We know what it is. And it's amazing. We have 1,500 feet of street edge. It is very rare when you look at projects, and certainly look at something like this, to have that opportunity to activate 1,500 feet of street edge in Cambridge. If you think about that for a minute, it is truly a changer in the community. Architectural richness, it's a term we use. It's one that's been used by others to show what this can be from an architectural standpoint. Sustainability, as I mentioned. A TDM program, transportation demand management. We have one now. We have a permit. How can we continue to expand on that? And then, as I said, how can you program the open space? That just gives you a very brief overview of sort of where the zoning is. I'm sure there will be questions and other things. I'd like to turn it over to David and have David walk you through the planning principles and the design principles that hopefully meet the goals that we talked about, the approval criteria we talked about, and the challenges that we have. David?
Thank you, John. Good evening. I'm David Manfredi from Elkis Manfredi Architects. There's a lot to cover here, and I'm going to do it very, very fast, but I'm going to start by saying this is an incredible opportunity when you think about where this project is in the history of Cambridge and in the history of development in Cambridge. The opportunity is to convert a single-use building, a retail building, to multiple-use building in an urban setting, and truly multiple uses. It's also the opportunity to take a kind of super block and break it back down to scale, to the scale of the surrounding network of streets. We're also proposing a very significant investment in public realm, and it really gets to what John was talking about. It's about sidewalks, and it's about thinking about First Street in the way that is kind of fresh, because First Street has traditionally been a way to get from one place to another place, but now it's very much a part of the connective tissue between Kendall Square and Cambridge Crossing to the north. And then finally, the idea, and this is not literally a fact, but what we're figuratively doing is taking retail from the third floor and we're bringing it to the street. We're bringing it to a street, First Street especially, but also Cambridge Side Place, where there are no active uses today and there will be in the future. And so we established a series of planning principles. They're really very simple, beginning with activate First Street with uses that engage pedestrians. You know what it looks like. Even when Sears was active, when Best Buy or Leechmere before it was very active, this was not a street that engaged pedestrians. It's narrow sidewalks. It's limited transparency. It's a lot of utilities and a lot of curb cuts. The opportunity really is to think about, and John mentioned all of this frontage that we will impact. There's 700 lineal feet excuse me, along First Street. We intend to bring retail all around this edge. We intend to bring retail, there is retail today here, and bring an active edge all the way to the Macy's corner. We also have the opportunity to make the block more porous. in several different ways. One is the Sears block, the Sears footprint, which is right here. Our plan is to bring a gallery kind of space through that into the food court, making just another path. It's about making pedestrian networks that tie the city together. And so from First Street, really along this path or along this path, directly into the mall, but more especially into Canal Park and around and on to the Charles River. We want to break down the super block, and let me explain that. So at the top is the existing plan. All the way from Sears, all the way down to Best Buy, it's one continuous street wall. There's a kind of hierarchy of moves here. One is to think about not one building, but three buildings. The first building is the Sears building. The second is a new building on the site of the parking garage, and the third is a new building on the site of Best Buy, with 40 feet of space between them, so that we're creating light and air between buildings. We're trying to pick up the rhythm of the surrounding streets. Second thing is today, Sears, loading docks, some infrastructure, more loading docks, small amount of office space, and then another big box. What is shown here in pink is retail edge. The opportunity to do retail that is most likely going to be smaller tenants, again, because of where the world is going, as Steve described. Restaurants that can spill out onto Canal Way, that can activate both sides of this arcade. We will relocate that infrastructure, create smaller scale stores here, active edge into an office lobby, active edge into a residential lobby, active edge into another office, lab lobby, retail around the corner that connects to the retail that's on Cambridge Side Place. So a lot of dead edge getting replaced by active uses that engage pedestrians. And reimagine First Street. And that's what First Street looks like today. The west side of the street has been recently rebuilt. Our proposal is that curb stays where it is, but the two new buildings that we propose here, the one on the Best Buy site and the one on the parking garage site, we will push east 10 feet. So a sidewalk that today is 10 to 12 feet, it varies, becomes 20 to 22 feet and accommodates a cycle track for that part of the block. Completely enhances the public realm here. We're not rebuilding the Sears building, so that street wall stays where it is, but you can see the spaces that are created in between. And you also see in this sketch the opportunity with a 20-foot sidewalk and with a cycle track and a complete street, the opportunity to put restaurants here that spill out onto the street and activate that street as well. You can also see, and this is a little bit deeper into the toolbox, but the idea of creating a kind of datum at the first floor, that this will be retail along this street, defining that datum, and really investing in the public realm where you think about the sidewalk and that storefront almost like you took the sidewalk and folded it up the side of the building. We also thought about the whole building and thought about creating a good urban street with setbacks. And so you're looking down First Street to Cambridge Side Place. This is the Sears building, where the parking garage is and where the Lechmere building is today. Basically what we're proposing is 3 new buildings and 1 reinvented building. I'll start with the reinvented building. Sears, which is a 3-story building today, we propose to add 2 floors and make it 85 feet, which John just mentioned was the original height of the PUD. Retail all along First and all along Canal Way, wrapping onto the canal. A kind of brow at the front, but a datum at 85 feet, which I think is important. 85 feet is also the height of Thomas Graves Landing. We think there's a datum somewhere in that zone of 65 to 85 that defines the public realm, defines the pedestrian zone. And we pick that up. We don't want it to be a absolutely dead level line, but we pick that up and we bring it onto the garage site. We separate these by 40 feet. This will have retail on the ground floor, 4 levels of office above, 5 levels, about 125,000 square feet of residential on top of that. A setback of 10 feet. So this is about 75 feet. So this was 85. This is 75. This is about 65. Again, retail at the base, office lab above, a 10-foot setback that wraps around onto Cambridge Side Place, another setback higher in the building. But creating this kind of datum at 65 to 75 feet corresponds to the opposite side of the street, defines this urban street wall, and then here it's actually the roof on these 2 buildings. There's additional building beyond. In the case of the middle building, it is a change of use, and we want to make that change of use quite legible from the street. And then the 4th building, the 3rd new building, but the 4th building in the composition is on Land Boulevard. I think we all recognize, I'm going to show you a sketch of that in a moment, but Land Boulevard's a very different street. It is truly an arterial through the city, and it is, as John mentioned, a significant distance from the canal, and so you can kind of see this sense of these ascending heights as you move around, and with the arcade, the original Galleria in the center. So now I'm looking down the street the other way. I took off the crop, and you can see the whole composition. And what you can see is there's that 85-foot datum that steps down to about 75 and steps down to about 65. The setbacks. This middle building is office on floors 2 through 5, and then residential above. We're very deliberately trying to make those uses legible. We're trying to make the base quite grounded in the neighborhood, in the material palette in the neighborhood, and then once we get above that datum, the residential becomes more light, more transparent, more glass, and clearly of a residential use. I'm going to talk very, very quickly about each of these buildings one by one. So in its context, you can see today Cambridge Side right here, and Cambridge Side Place, First Street, and Land, and the entire block as it exists today. It was very interesting, that shot, that aerial that Steve showed, and how really in the time this building was designed, it really took a kind of suburban topology and made it a very urban form. So it made that transformation now 30 years later, as we're proposing it, quite possible. And so you can see Sears, the parking garage site, the Leechmere site, and the Macy site. And a series of buildings, each different, largely participating in a pretty tight material palette, also participating in this series of datum as we move around. No curtain wall, a lot of materiality to these buildings, color and texture to these buildings, appropriate to that surrounding neighborhood. So very quickly, each building, the Sears building, 3 stories today. We'll take all of that building envelope off. We propose to add 2 stories. We don't know if this is an office building or a lab building. We're showing you a penthouse that would accommodate a lab use. So you're looking at a penthouse that's 35 feet tall. If it's an office building, it's obviously going to be 18 feet tall, almost half of that. Retail at the base, entrance to the office, entrance to an arcade that brings you through into the food court and onto the canal, a kind of brow that defines the base of the building. This is probably our most referential building in that it has a base, it has a middle, it has a top, it has a pattern of fenestration that is very much in the historical context of East Cambridge. The middle building, I've shown you this rendering a couple times. Again, we think this is terracotta, some bigger openings, a little finer grain, but still materiality, and then more transparency, and the language of residential above, the language of balconies. Setback 10 feet, with some terrace space for those first floor units. And then the building on the corner, which is on the corner of First and Cambridge Side Place, retail on the ground floor, possibility of retail on the second floor. We raised the base of the building to be 2 stories in height. We think this is terracotta. It sets back at about 65 feet. Sets back 10 off the building face. Actually sets back a little bit more so that we're creating an outdoor terrace, and then a total of 11 stories. That's in its context with the existing building, and you can see the series of datum, but the most important being right here at that 65 feet and that setback, and then the final 6 floors of the building. And then the last view is on Land Boulevard, the biggest building. This is on the Macy's site. This is 12 stories, and again, that notion of a kind of 2-story base. Again, this could be 2 stories of retail. Retail lobby on the ground floor, very small retail opportunity on the corner, but a second floor of retail that would connect directly into the arcade of Cambridge Side, really have its entrance not necessarily from the street, but possibly from the street, but from the second floor of the arcade and the mall, and then office, which by the way would line up and could also connect. And again, we're showing these. I'm calling them office. I'm calling them lab. We're not sure how they will ultimately be tenanted, but we are showing you buildings that are 14.6, 15 feet floor to floor to accommodate those kinds of science and technology uses. That I'll go back to Stephen. Out of the way.
Thank you, David. And, I'll try to be brief, or to try to talk a little bit about community benefits, but you have this package, and a lot of people here already know some of the things. And we plan to preserve the atrium, as you heard, as the public connection between the canal and the park. We want to improve the existing streetscape and enhance the pedestrian experience, which we want to add pathways with bicycle safety. David didn't go into the detail of that, but there'll be a cycle track, and all the details will be worked out, and there'll be plenty of available places to have bicycles, and we'll work out all the details of that. We want to be a partner with our neighbors by donating to the tree fund, and we'll work out the details of that as we go through the process. We're introducing a diverse amount of different kind of uses. With the core of it, again, will be the retail. The people have asked us if we would consider a seasonal farmers market along the canal, and we're working with some people to try to figure out how to do that, how often to do it, and what seasons to do it. We'd like a pages are the same. Okay, so we try to simplify some of these things, and the local arts community has asked us to see if we would allow local artists to have the opportunity to perform, work, and display their work, and so we're working on a plan to do that, and kind of activating the street and acting the activity and not making it so enclosed, and making it a little more pedestrian friendly makes it easy to do some of these things. There are a lot of economic benefits, diversification of the tax base, permit fees, construction and permanent jobs, affordable housing, housing contribution payment, all these things are benefits, I think, that will accrue to the community. And we'll have a wide variety of regular programming to public benefit, and we want to make the riverfront more dynamic. We're working on some plans to activate the riverfront for the benefit of the community and the people in Cambridge, and we can get more into the details of that in later meetings if you. And we're working with some educational experiences on the river for the youth of the city, and with also some programming with senior citizens. So the next slide is, we won't go through all the details of these, but these some of the things where we've had part of the community during the last 30 years, and a lot of them are things that have continued over 30 years. We set up a scholarship fund 30 years ago for people that lived in the East Cambridge area, and we continue to do it. And a lot of people every year. We get a thank you for extending the availability for some opportunity for them to go to school. And we do things like during winter storms and things like that, people can park in the garage that live in the community, and there's no charge for that. And we try to work with them to see what benefits that could be available that might work for them too. So I can go on, and I could go through every the details of all these things, but I know we're limited in the amount of time, and we need time to have the questions. So I thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope we'll be able to have some very good dialogue in the future.
Thank you very much. Rich, does that conclude the formal presentation?
That concludes it for us.
Okay.
Yes, thanks very much,
All right.
Kathy.
Does the board want to ask the proponent questions before we get public comment? Nope. I'm seeing lots of no's. All right, then we will go directly to public comment. Our rules for public comment is we do have a sign-up list, but if you haven't signed up, don't worry. We will make sure that everyone who's here to speak gets a chance to. When you do get called on to speak, please come forward to the podium and speak into the microphone. Give your name and address. Spell either or both if they're at all challenging for the stenographer. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We have a system of lights that will tell you green for go, yellow for get ready to stop, and red for stop. I think that covers most of our rules. Okay, so the first person who signed up to speak is Alfred Disorio. Disadoro. Thank you, sir.
My name is Alfred Disadoro, D as in David, I-S-I, D as in David, O-R-O. I live at 69 6th Street in East Cambridge. I work on 6th Street at the Cambridge Public Library, the O'Connell branch. And me and my wife, Karen, love East Cambridge. The mall has always been a big part of East Cambridge. We're very proud of it. We're very proud of the open space, the canal. We bring all our friends and family over there, and they are also impressed. The mall has been a great neighbor. Just the fact that you can park your car for free there during a snowstorm, getting the cars off the road so that the plows can clear the streets is huge. We really appreciate it. But the main thing is, my wife and I spend a lot of time there. Retail is in a tough position. We see less and less people every time we go there. When we look back 10 years and we look back today, especially the third floor, which they are changing, it's a ghost town. And we don't want to lose them all. It's a very important part of East Cambridge. It needs help. Mixed use is the way to go today. We go to Assembly Square, it seems to work pretty good over there. So we are all for giving Steve and his team the help that they need to get the mall up and running again, get the activity back, and to get First Street enlivened. It's a dead zone out there. It's a brick wall. There's nobody walking there. And it needs a lot of help. I think those 3 buildings would do a lot to help that out. So in closing remarks, all I can say is let's give them the help. Let's keep the mall going. We don't want to see a huge fence around it like other properties in East Cambridge in 10 years. Let's get it going. Let's give them the help. They've been great neighbors, wonderful people, and we're really proud of that mall, the open space, and the canal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Chris Matthews.
Chris Matthews. And I live on 26 6th Street. I'm a neighbor of Al and Karen's. Al said a lot that I wanted to say about the project. There's a lot to like here. My focus is on First Street, and I think this side of First Street, there's a lot to like. But it makes me think that it's a game changer for what's being planned for the other side of First Street, particularly the loss of 800 parking spaces, which makes a lot of sense, but it has to be considered along with the loss of 400 parking spaces on the other side of the street, and the sale of that public asset to a private entity. So I just urge the planning board to think of First Street as a whole rather than in little pieces. So I have two reservations about the project. One is to do with the lack of comprehensive planning for First Street, and the other is to do with the public benefits. The mall, when it was first built, came with unbelievable public benefits. The canal, the park, great pedestrian connections. And when they're proposing to add 80% of density to that PUD, I don't see commensurate public benefits this time around. And I've always advocated for public benefits that also benefit the project, in the way that Roger Street Park benefits Alexandria. The open space at Volpe will benefit them. And in this case, we have a lot of open space, but the connections are not great. In looking at the 850-foot long boardwalk that we did at Broad Canal in partnership with the power plants, I would love to see a pedestrian connection that I go back. It's talked about in the staff memo from this year. It's referred to in the 2011 Cambridge Riverfront Plan, and that is the pedestrian connection from the canal behind the Museum of Science to the Boston side. I think actually that's shorter than the Broad Canal that we did with the power plant. It's about 800 feet as opposed to 850 feet. It would completely transform the way that this part of the river is used. You could jog along it, you could come back along the Longfellow Bridge. There are unbelievable potential there. I think it's doable. I think it would be a great branding opportunity for you guys. And at that point, because the Science Museum is essentially a dam, the river doesn't fluctuate. It flows slowly. It's very shallow. It would be completely doable, and I think worthy of a project of this size and scope. Thank you.
Mr. Matthews, can you hold on just a second, please?
Just, sorry, a question. We've got this magnificent tool in front of us, which is the model. Could you just reference, Mr. Matthews, where you imagine this connection is that you just described? Thank you.
Yeah. So it would start at the Esplanade and
Thank you. Next on the list is Sharon Zimmerman.
Hi, I'm Sharon Zimmerman. I'm here representing Cambridge Camping. I'm the executive director. Our address is 99 Bishop Allen Drive. We are a 125-year-old Cambridge agency, and we provide summer camp programs to 500 urban kids from under-resourced circumstances every year. We are small, but we are mighty, and we know the Cambridge community really well. 3 years ago, Paul Ryder called me to tell me that Cambridge Camping was chosen as the Cambridge beneficiary for the Cambridge Side's first half marathon event, and I should expect a large donation. It was a tough year financially for us, and I thought God herself had come down and given us the gift we needed to get through the year. Since the planning began for that very first marathon, I've worked closely with Peter DeVito, VP of Operations, and his staff on a number of community projects and events. I've gotten to know how they do business and what their values are. What I've learned is that New England Development cares deeply about Cambridge. They know what it takes to make a community feel like a real community. They value diversity, they treat people right, and they care about their customers, partners, and those who participate in all the various events and resources they bring to Cambridge. And they don't just care about those with deep pockets enough to shop or register for a marathon or buy a ticket to an event. They care about those who have less, who struggle, and who don't have equal access to so many of the great things that Cambridge has to offer. They do walk the walk. They've given over $50,000 to Cambridge Camping to help send low-income kids to camp. Peter's team invited 30 of our campers and camper families to their run and ride event last year, and they provided them with breakfast, t-shirts, bikes, even offered our families transportation so that they could attend. They fixed 20 of our broken down, unrideable camp bikes at no charge at a different time. They gave us hundreds of marathon jackets and t-shirts, which we gave out to the campers. These kids often never get to wear new clothing. Peter served on the honorary committee for our 125th event and helped to raise money from some of his vendors, which I know compromised what he could ask from them for his events. Peter's team is working with us to host this year's annual event at Cambridge Side. They're providing space at no cost. They got us the river boat ride at no cost. They're soliciting for in-kind donations for food and drinks, and they're assisting with marketing and advertising, all pro bono. I have sat around the conference table with Peter's team talking about many, many community events, and here's what comes through. Generosity with sincerity, commitment to making Cambridge an even better community, an unrelenting desire to be successful, and respect and willingness to listen and collaborate. Any project that New England Development wants to bring to Cambridge should be wholeheartedly supported. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Next on the list is Josh Drayton.
My name is Josh Drayton, D-R-A-Y-T-O-N. I'm a lifelong resident of Cambridge. I grew up here. I live at 36A Rice Street now. Grew up on Tremont, bought bikes here. I'm kind of glad to be, like, the Galleria Mall is a lot in my memory as a kid, and to actually be rubbing elbows with people that actually developed it. Before I was even a carpenter, I actually liked the overall design, and being a kid in the Galleria Mall, it was actually a great activity for me, and couldn't wait on weekends to get out there and ride my bike from Tremont down to the Galleria Mall, and still one of my favorite places to eat lunch. I like to watch the water. But as you know, behalf of the carpenters and adding more work for my brothers, I'm just honored, you know, and happy. My grandmother would be happy to see me speaking on behalf of, you know, more work and more revenue, hopefully, with this retail, because I kind of agree. We are, I do have Amazon, but we need to, all right. But I'm not gonna take too long. But I am a fit. I'm trying to be more of a fit guy and fit family. When you add these bikes, the paths, and all this other farmers market, hopefully, I need to get my daughter out there and hopefully add the same memory that I had, and you know, get on these bikes. That's what we like to do. And of course, when we get there, we have to buy her something. So, on behalf of the carpenters, Josh Strait, and I'm just want to say I'm for it, and thank you for actually listening and taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Chris Carrera.
Korea. Thank you. C-O-R-R-E-I-A. So, my name's Christopher Correa. I'm not just a Cambridge resident, I'm a Canterbridgian. Born and raised, Putnam Ave, currently live in East Cambridge. I'm here representing Carpenters Local 328, as well as Cambridge residents. Cambridge Side's been a great neighbor to the community, as well as a stomping ground and work opportunity for many of the local youth. Personally, I have fond memories of going to the sports museum there as a kid, working on the second floor at Foot Locker. I mean, it's been a staple forever. And I think the third floor itself, it's been a ghost town for anyone who's been up there in the past few years. So switching to mixed use, adding residential, I think it would help. If we don't step forward with the times, I think what we're going to have is another Meadow Glen Mall or Assembly Square Mall sitting in our yard. I know a lot of people are going to complain about the height, and they're going to complain about the glass and the glare off the glass and the heat off the glass. Too much of that is going to leave us another site like the jail. And we're going to have another big eyesore that is getting no use. We're getting more residents coming into the city. Was it 20% for resident for low income? I think that helps. We need it. As it is, we can barely afford to live in the city. I'm for it. I'm all for it. I think people need to, the city, the residents and the people in the higher ups need to push to actually make things like this happen. First Street definitely needs a new look. It's been an eyesore for many years. As far as that goes, I'm for the rezoning. I'm all about what these guys are doing. It looks great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Mark Ford.
Good evening. My name is Mark Ford. I live at 57 Gore Street in East Cambridge and have for the last 42 years. I've seen a lot of things change in my neighborhood, mostly for the better. And I remember when this mall was built, it was great. It was a place to hang out. It was a place to shop. It was a place to go eat and entertain your family. And I would really hate for that to go away. You know, I benefit from that a couple times a week. And again, I'd hate to see it go away. And I'm also a 328 carpenter. And being a carpenter and from Cambridge, should this project go forward, there's a great chance that I could be on it. And then also I could, provide for my family from it also. And I totally agree that they need to dress up First Street. It is a bit of a kind of dead zone. And also, having been on the third floor of the mall, it's pretty much dead there too. And I'd love to see that keep going. I'd hate to lose this wonderful place in my neighborhood. And for that reason, I am for this project, and I would love to see it go forward. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tom Joyce.
Hello, my name is Tom Joyce, Joyce. I live at 270 3rd Street. For about 20 years, I lived at the intersection of 3rd and Cambridge, 3rd and Spring Street. I work at the intersection of 3rd and Cambridge Street. So I live and work within a couple of blocks of this mall for the last 35 years. 25 years living, 35 years working. So I've seen this develop from empty parking lots with warehouse liquors in Leechmere to what it is today. I agree that it was badly designed to begin with the First Street edge. I think most people agree now it never should have been designed that way to begin with. I see a lot of great solutions to that problem here. I think there's a consensus that we have to change First Street, and with all the development going on there, this would be the real eyesore of the street if it's left in its current condition. So bring the retail down, open it up. Living on the corner of Binney Street, I see the way Binney Street has been activated with the ground floor spaces. More people walking on Binney Street these days than ever before. So that's what we need up here. I have a few concerns on the design project. For instance, I see the Sears building. I love that new design, that strong roof line. And then I see a large metal silver structure on the roof. At the planning team last week, I said it looked like somebody dropped a freight car on the roof of the Sears building. And unfortunately, that's what it looks like to me. Because if they put labs in that building, they need mechanicals like that. And living at the corner of 3rd and Binney, I know what it's like to live near lab buildings. I have lab buildings out every window of my apartment. They're noisy. That's I have an affordable unit there. I'm very lucky to be there. I put up with the noise. I understand that. I don't want to see my neighbors in the One First building have to deal with that as well. And I think that, particularly given the height of the other building on the other side above Macy's, which appears very large to me, that if you restrict lab use in the Sears building, you don't need that large structure on the top. You don't need the noise that goes with it. And I just don't think that particular building should have lab in it. And something that, what I see as a design issue of the mall itself now, and I'm not sure how or whether it's in your purview to fix it. Currently, Cambridge Side Place is, my GPS will tell me almost anywhere I'm going near Land Boulevard, sends me down Cambridge Side Place. You get down to the intersection with Land Boulevard, you see the smallest car cannot make a U-turn on Cambridge Side and Land Boulevard. Therefore, the largest SUVs you can imagine try to make that turn, backing up 2 or 3 times, trying to make a U-turn at that intersection. So anything that you can do to make it impossible for them to do so would increase that traffic flow, improve that traffic flow. And one suggestion I had is that 5-minute parking for Best Buy along Cambridge Side, possibly move it into a space in the garage where they could go in and out without having to pay parking for short term, get some of those cars off of Cambridge Side and avoid that bottleneck. As long as we're improving everything else, I'd like to see that improved as well. But as for the mall itself, I totally agree. It's adapt or die. I want that mall to stay there. I like the idea of having residential and mixed use. Problem with the height of the building, but there's a lot to work with here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. I have lived at that address since 1984, so I predate them all. I remember walking through the parking lot around Leechmere and Warehouse Liquors, and I too want this place to succeed, but I am leery of the walling in of my neighborhood. Every direction, the walls are getting closer and closer. And I can speak very, very knowledgeably about how noise travels, because driving the piles for this mall, I'm on the other side of 3rd Street, woke us up every morning. And labs are a ton noisier than that. Less vibration, but a lot of noise. And I agree with Tom. There should be no labs that close to people's homes, because the noise will just get in there, and it's bad enough. We have so much construction. Now, I was noticing some strange things in the transportation discussion in the CDD memo. I'm usually not one to talk about parking and transportation, but this makes no note of the fact that the mall currently provides a shuttle that helps people get around without a car. It makes no mention of the fact that I believe it's like more than half the people who come to the mall now don't use a car. And in fact, First Street does have a lot of pedestrians on it. I walk on First Street. And it also makes no mention of the fact that there's the Easy Ride. There's no reason that the Easy Ride couldn't be worked in to the extent that this becomes residences, and also offices that may want to link to the other things that the Easy Ride links to. There's, the Easy Ride comes right by there. So there's no good reason for that not to become part of this. And what people said before me about parking and the loss of parking spaces, it's a serious issue. I'm lucky, I have off-street parking, but plenty of my neighbors don't. And it is simply the case that lots and lots of people still come to the area and still want to park. People still live here. People still have cars. And I was incredibly pleased to hear that they are planning on doing a parking study at the zoning stage. Make sure that that happens, because that's really important, and that should be precedent for every other zoning change that you get in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Marquise Mecca?
Good evening. My name is Marquise Mecca. That's M-E-C-A. I live at an intersection of 3rd and Otis. I haven't lived here as long as a lot of people who lived in Cambridge, unfortunately. But I can remember coming to the mall in high school, and the mall is the mall, man. It's a staple point of Cambridge, man, East Cambridge especially. I'm a local 7 iron worker, and to be able to work in the neighborhood that I live in and give back to the neighborhood that I live in, I think it would be unbelievable. I don't know what's more emptier, First Street at 5:30 in the morning when you're trying to walk to the train, or the 3rd level of the mall. Still kind of confused on that. But I think that these developers, what we've seen up here is going to be great for East Cambridge. It's going to be great for Cambridge. It's an unbelievable project. I know me, being an iron worker, and all my fellow brothers and sisters in the trade are all for this. And with you guys, I think we guys and the developers, I think we can make something magical happen in Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Rafael Cabral?
Good evening. My name is Rafael Cabral. I live at 375 Howard Street. I'm a local 7 iron worker, and I get to work on a lot of redevelopment around the surrounding cities. And as a Cambridge resident, I must say I feel a little jealous with the Assembly Road project in Somerville and the casino. Nothing really is happening in Cambridge. So when I found out about this project, I must say I feel very excited. This project will be not only convenience for me, but I will take much pride in knowing that I participated in this complete transformation that will be better for my city. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank Murray?
I am Frank Murray. I rent at 85 Winter Street. I'm in full support of this project as well. I'm a local 7 iron worker too. Like my union brothers just said, you know, going to the mall is a great thing. I haven't lived here my whole life, but to be able to go there, have lunch, shop, you know, nice Sunday, it's a beautiful place, and to see that it's going to be redeveloped is just another plus. So also to be able to work in my neighborhood, like Mecca said, it's an awesome thing to watch your neighborhood get better. And with that being said, I'm in full support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Fantasia?
Hello, Patrick Fantasia, 225 Ben Street, Unit 3, which I think I actually messed up on the sheet. I just moved there. But, yeah, I'm new to the area of Cambridge, but I've lived in Massachusetts my whole life. I also work in construction, and, yeah, I think the new project would be good for the community. And I like the idea of it. I did go to the mall a lot when I was younger, and I just, you know, why not make good use of the space? Thank you.
Thank you. Ilan Levy.
Good evening. Ilan Levy, 148 Spring Street, East Cambridge. Good evening, members of the board. I think, obviously, everybody likes New England development. The mall is awesome. I actually can remember the first time I came to Boston, I went and I saw Lechmere, and there wasn't a mall. But the important thing is, although we can renovate First Street, I'm wondering why do we have to have an increase in density? And I'm also worried about the impact that it's going to have, considering the contextual environment in which we are, Valpy, the traffic concerns that we have, the electricity problem that we have with the Eversource plant coming or not coming, depending on what the needs are. So I have a little bit of concerns on that side, but I'm going to refer to you and your wisdom to figure this one out. What I'm going to ask, though, is that we really understand that we are giving 500,000 square feet away for, at least to me, it doesn't seem any really hardship. You could redo First Street and move all of the third floor onto the street, which is what they're doing. Put some housing. You don't have to be as big as they are, but if they are, that's fine with me also. I don't mind on that side. What I would like to see, though, is proper mitigation. I think that what Mr. Matthew has proposed is something that I'm stand behind quite happily, and I wish that you will also help us get a proper mitigation from New England Development, considering what they are asking, which is a substantial increase in density in a lot and for hardship that I don't think is obvious. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you. Jim Henry.
Good evening. James Henry. I live at 93 Playstead Road in Medford. But I spent the first 50 years of my life in Cambridge, Roberts Road, and I lived on 3rd Street when the mall was built. And I've served in several different, currently I work for Senator Sal DiDomenico, but I worked in the building department, I worked in the mayor's office, and I've interacted with Rich McKinnon, who I've known for many years, almost my whole life. It's the best organization in the city, or one of the best. The kindness that they've bestowed on people less fortunate is unmatched, and I'm 100% in support of the project. I was thinking about it the other day. I worked at Leechmere Sales when I was a teenager, and I remember it was just a big wasteland. There was a liquor store and a casket company in Leechmere, and since they came into the neighborhood, they improved everything dramatically, and I think that project on First Street would be a great addition to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that brings me to the end of my list, but I know we filled up every box on the list, so I figured there are some of you who didn't get a chance to speak. So, sir, why don't you go first? Yep. Yep.
Good evening. My name's Dave Boris. I live at 126 Harvey Street. I've been there 25 years now, and raised my kids in Cambridge Public Schools. It's been a wonderful city, and I was actually really heartened to hear the input. I'm a member of the Carpenters Union. I'm a business agent for Pile Drivers Local 56. My apologies, ma'am, about our work. I've been on the receiving end of that on the job site, and I understand that. I could tell some good stories about it, but I won't tonight. But I really appreciate the civic, the input from the community about New England's development commitment to the community. I really, that was great to hear, because I appreciate what so many business partners do for particularly the students and the children of this city. They really have there's a lot offered on the table, and so it's great to hear that New England Development has that civic mindedness. I share people's concerns about we're going to have a landscape littered with dead and dying malls. And one of the issues, we're in the middle of a construction boom, and it's a great time to take advantage of investors who are willing to put money into the system to do these changes, because we've all been around when the music stops and it's all of a sudden you're left with a half-built building or a project that didn't happen because the investment boom is over. And so while we can, I'd love to see the mall transformed into something more useful. I really like the idea that there's light industry in the mix, because there's been a lot of retail jobs lost, and this would pick up some of the slack where those jobs were lost. I certainly like the fact that there's commitment to affordable housing and contributions to that system. I want people to be able to live in the city. I'm cognizant of my own kids we're not sure they're going to be able to afford to live in the city, and as much affordable housing as we can build would be great. I think that I also like the sidewalk development. The fact that it's going to be much wider sidewalks. If there's less cars coming to the city, that's great. If First Street is now a more appealing place to walk, if it's going to increase pedestrian traffic, I'm all in favor of that. That's a great idea. Obviously, I support the construction jobs that this will offer. I take every opportunity I can to say that the Carpenters Union and every other trade union here tonight has apprenticeship programs. We go to the city's college night to say, hey, we're an opportunity too. And for a kid in Cambridge, there's no reason. I mean, you can walk to work. You can walk to great jobs and not be in college debt after 4 years. So you can be an apprentice in 4 years and be out there working right in your town. You don't have to drive. In my working career, when I was carrying the tools, I'm still working, but when I was carrying the tools, I had 2 jobs in my career in Cambridge. And everywhere else I was driving. But right now, if you live anywhere in the city, you can get on the Red Line and Red Line to work and have a great career. So I'm in support of this project because of all it offers to our city and to the youth in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thanks. I was too busy chatting to sign up. I am Jay Wasserman of 34 2nd Street, and I'm a relative newcomer, only 20 years. So let me quickly go over the things I really like about the project, and there's pretty much nothing I don't like. So I really like that we're finally addressing the activation of First Street. It's been a mess for a long time, and it'll just open it up. I like the fact that we might get retail above the first floor. It's nice that all the new buildings are getting first floor retail, but you want an interesting city as part of this mixed use. And this is the best opportunity with the whole mall and how they interact. So it could be a really interesting place to go to and be at. The one other thing I just want to address is the canal. I just want to make sure they focus on keeping the canal well activated and addressing as much retail activities, food out there. I'd really wish you could convince your neighbor. Unfortunately, there was a bad planning decision years ago that allowed them to take away the retail they were supposed to have. There's a restaurant that you can just see is designed in the building next door. It'd be great if you can convince them, especially since that retail is usually empty and under construction. And another thing, if you're looking for community benefits, right at the corner there is a boathouse that the DCR is looking to rebuild, but they need the cash. And that's been sitting there. It's beautiful, and it could be a great community development right on your doorstep. So otherwise, I love mixed use. I've been a big advocate of mixed use, and I think this will be a great development. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi. My name is Steve Bennett, B-E-N-N-E-T-T. I live at 29 Cogswell Avenue in North Cambridge. I've been in Cambridge for 47 years now, since coming here for school, and I've worked in various creative pursuits as an author, a technology consultant, creative director of a web firm, and now as a visual artist. Sidebar, Cambridge is a great place to be if you're involved in the arts or anything creative, particularly with the wonderful Cambridge Arts Council. It was the Cambridge Arts Council that actually introduced me to the Cambridge Side people. At Cambridge Side, they have this remarkable video column by the elevators. It stands about yay high, and then it's 10 feet tall and 30 feet around. So it's like a wraparound screen, and they wanted some multimedia content. Part of my practice involves creating multimedia content. So Julie Berry of the city said, why don't you talk to Steve Bennett? We talked, and I figured, okay, they want something to put up on the wall there, and it turned into a wonderful relationship over the past year where Melissa Levita and Catherine Brady have worked with me and my motion design partner to create pieces for the mall that not only fit in, but they had us talk to people in the mall, the people who work there and passersby, and they've been actively involved in helping us create art that really fits in with our whole shop, dine, and experience approach now. So we've done some 7 videos, and we'll be doing some more. And I think that given their commitment to creating art that's more than window dressing, that whatever plans are in the works here to get local artists involved and to become a hub of art as a destination place, I think that the will seems to be there, and they're wonderful to work with, and I hope this project comes through because I think it'll be a terrific boost for local arts and local artists of all sorts. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Arnold Williams, 375 Washington Street, Cambridge, and I'm a true Cambridgian. I'm 4th generation Cambridge, and local 151 Laborers Union for 38 years, and Louis Bocci, one of my brothers here, and I like what I hear tonight, and I think this going forward with everything that needs to be done is I think it's all about residential for me. The thing that bites me and makes me bite my tongue is just not to get off the subject, is if you go down the block from the Cambridge side Galleria, what's going on with the courthouse? I mean, we're still in, what's going on with that? I mean, that's residential, but, as far as talking about being a ghost town, it is a ghost town down there on First Street. Once the sun goes down, there's nothing going down there. There's nothing going on. So, from what I heard tonight, I like some of the plans. I like the upgrades and everything. Matter of fact, I helped build that mall. That was a long time ago. Come to think of it, and after 38 years of doing construction, man, it's like I look around the city, man, and I can go around and see. I remember working on that building. I remember working on that building. I remember doing that sidewalk over there, But at the time when we built this thing, that was a state-of-the-art. Galleria was a state-of-the-art. But now it's time to move on. It's definitely time to move on. And with that, I just want to say, man, I hope that we, it doesn't fall short and we end up like what we have at the courthouse right now. Stalled negotiations. That's a ghost town. And I hope it doesn't happen here with the Galleria Mall. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charles Hollins, Hollins, and I'm here representing Caspar Shelter and related programs in Cambridge. I'm standing in for Julia Lundergan, who is the director at Caspar Shelter and could not be here tonight. A couple of bullet points that she wanted me to remind people about is the community service really that the Cambridge side has been providing with us. Cambridge side has been a sustaining supporter of Caspar in our fight against the opioid crisis and homelessness for over a decade. Cambridge side was literally our first corporate sponsor. Cambridge side and Peter DeVito have been a member of Caspar's advisory committee since its inception in the 70s. Rick McKinnon, Cambridge side advisor, was one of the original supporters of Caspar, planning and securing the original trailers that we used to house the homeless in the 70s, and I'm sure that Rich has a lot of stories about that. Cambridge side has provided guidance and assistance and provided much needed resources to our homeless neighbors who are battling addiction, and to the point of providing socks and just really day-to-day life needs for people who we cared for years and years. Cambridge side has been a leader in providing community support for our work and bringing in new supporters to help us sustain our work. As a matter of fact, in 1993, when we had really no supporters, Cambridge side was the first person that supported us with a whopping donation of $25. And that went a long way because it was our first corporate sponsor. It was sort of a teaser. And since then, there's been no better sponsor and supporter of Caspar. The bottom line is the folks at Cambridge side do more than actually write checks. They actually really put their heart in it. They're connected to community. And that's what we want to just say, kind of the culture of Cambridge side as a community partner. And we certainly support them. And thank you for this opportunity to say that.
All right. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Dennis?
So my name is Dennis Carlone, C-A-R-L-O-N-E. I live at 9 Washington Avenue. I'm a city councilor, but I'm also the originator of the East Cambridge Riverfront Plan back in 76 through 78, and then helped Roger Booth and the city implement the plan. And the reason I've handed out the copies of the report is, quite frankly, the scan copy you got was probably the worst and earliest scan of anything in the United States. And I thought it would be useful if you can see what the concepts were. More importantly, the guidelines, which is the type, excuse me, the type portion. I underlined relevant areas, and I highlighted in red really relevant areas. And the reason why I say that, these are the guidelines that created East Cambridge Riverfront, and they're the only guidelines that the council approved for this area. Subsequent guidelines add more information. In principle, I agree with them, but this is the design review process guidelines. Now, I have always said the Galleria, Cambridge side, excuse me, now, is the heart of this plan. Everything, and you look at the drawings, we show an arcade where it is, we show it at 2 stories. Everything about the original plan was a long process for the Galleria, for Cambridge side, sorry. 26 different designs were done before Roger Booth and I said, go with it, to come back here. I want to say something else. In my 30 years as a consultant, after the petitioners spoke, the urban designers spoke and told you their reaction of this proposal. So I feel in this revised way of doing things, that's partly me, because I'm the only guy standing who participated in this. Les Barber's retired, Roger Booth's retired. I saw Roger on Friday. He sends his best. So there's no doubt in my mind that Cambridge side has to be maintained. Retail has suffered. It's also suffered at Assembly Square Mall, by the way, and in Harvard Square. The movie theater's doing fine. The restaurants are doing fine. Everything else is on edge. This is from Somerville folks telling me that who review the numbers. That might not be public, but that's the case. So retail is in danger. My question, the principal question, how much is too much? I don't see an economic analysis, and we've required that in the past when I was a consultant, to certify all this is necessary. I don't see it. I've been fortunate to have meetings. We've had some good productive meetings. The imagery has gotten to respect the original guidelines more and materials, and I'm grateful for that. I think the setbacks on First Street are extremely well done. The heights bother me. You will notice in the guidelines that it specifically said the edge of the crescent, the building should be low to maximize the amount of hours that bathe the canal. You all know about public spaces and sun, and one of the prime ingredients is sun. Labs rent at $85 and up to almost $100 a foot in Kendall Square. They're showing labs, it's going to be labs. 35 feet of mechanical have to be added to the heights. In the excellent memo that you have, there are some major mistakes on existing heights. If you look at existing heights, it says it's the highest element at 105 feet for the Galleria Mall. That's the arcade rotundas. Everything else is 3 stories. 65 feet, might be a little more, a little less. It's not that. The housing on the canal that Unihab did, 99 feet, that might be the elevator. There's 2 banks of elevators. Everything else, I think it's less than 85 feet. I actually think it's closer to 80 feet. And that's true throughout all these numbers. They're all exaggerated because they're taking the highest point as opposed to what zoning allows. And that needs to be corrected because it looks like, oh, it's just a simple upgrade. So please look at the guidelines, only knowing that that's where we came from. And one other thing before I briefly critique this developer, First Street, when he heard about this proposal, he said to his consulting team, and I was there, why didn't we ask for 5 more stories? This is a precedent. It's unique that it's the Galleria. That makes it unusual, I agree. But are labs really the secret ingredient to make the retail work? Unless we're saying economically we need that to make it succeed. Now, as far as First Street, the one weakness we've had, and Roger and I fought like mad to animate First Street, but the rationale was to make the arcade work, we had to give up First Street. So I totally agree with the intent of humanizing First Street. I think the heights are higher than anything else in this area. That was on purpose. The neighborhood asked us, keep development low, so we made 4 or 5 stories on First Street. That was what the neighborhood asked for. They asked us to get the trucks out of the neighborhood, and the Binney Street connector was that. They asked for open space. That became the core. 12 acres out of 40 acres is open space. Very unique. To me, the Triangular Park was the forecourt for the Galleria to, Cambridge side to be successful. You can't miss it driving on Land Boulevard. In the guidelines, it says Land Boulevard. No, it says Industrial Way or whatever it says. I can't remember what it was called before. So, a couple of things. On other large upzonings, we're doing 40% housing, not 20% housing. North Point is 60% housing. They're bigger. I agree. 20%? You've heard that foundations are going to be expensive. Sure, if you go up to 185 feet, in a district that's 85 feet, in a building that's 65 feet, yeah, you have to do extra foundations work. If you go up 85 feet, certainly a lot less. I think my biggest concern is precedent. And you're going to get other people coming in who are going to buy a property and they're going to say, we want to go up higher. And sure, we can say this was retail, but as has been said, a 70, 80% premium on top. Keep in mind the garage that's coming down, that FAR, they have already because it's built, and that's an improvement. So I'm not against increasing the viability. I just have seen no analysis that this is necessary, and nobody that I know of can evaluate that analysis. In the past, the planning board has hired people. Labs and light industry, that was never the intent. Granted, there weren't labs. And on the canal, that just sends a a shiver up my spine. And if other folks feel comfortable with it, the Hotel Sonesta, I mean, they own that land. So be it. So I think that's all. I ask you to read the guidelines. I think you're going to be surprised that, geez, these are pretty good. And oh my gosh, these are reasonable. And that's why it looks the way it does. I can tell you that there were buildings that were proposed to be all metal and little or no windows. There was another building on the canal that was going to be concrete block. There was going to be a pyramid built, 120 feet high. There was going to be a 240-foot high tower on the river. And all these got changed because of the guidelines, because of the design review. And whatever happens here, design review has to be as strong, if not stronger, than anywhere else in the city, because you have an existing fabric that won great recognition for Cambridge. It's been very successful, and I'm thrilled it's successful, but is it overwhelming everything else? That's my big concern. So thank you for your time. I don't want the reports. My grandchildren would really enjoy that.
Is there anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak who would like to be heard? Okay. So we can turn to board discussion. We have, as was mentioned, an extensive memo from staff. If there are any questions for staff that folks want to ask, I guess as a opener here, I'll just remind people, at this stage we are talking about the zoning, and what is proposed would require the project to also go through a special permit process. And so there are some details that, probably like cladding and color and things like that, that we will certainly at a granular level have that opportunity to look at those should the zoning pass at a special permit phase. But at this stage, we're really looking at the big picture kind of stuff. So do folks have questions for staff first, or do you guys want to just dive in? Dive in. All right, I like it.
I guess I was surprised there was no speaker from the East Cambridge planning team. And yes, I have it right here. And I just want to, I think it would be important to, at least for us to look at some of those points. I'm going to try to give like a 2-minute summary of the letter, which I read to say the idea of supporting the project is good. They don't support it because they, as presented, because of issues with the 185-foot height zone, the need for a parking study to demonstrate that it would work. They don't think lab use is appropriate. They would like, in terms of connectivity, they're concerned about crossing Monsignor O'Brien Highway, which is part of the North Point Cambridge Crossing project, but you can see how North Point is one sort of activity, the Galleria is another. There's going to be a lot more pedestrian traffic. And arts integration are very important, and they want that worked out in more detail. And they feel that the mitigation proposed is not deemed commensurate with the increased impact. Some of those are, perhaps the last two things, are things often the city council likes to take the lead on. But it seems like at least the height and the lab use is maybe something we should talk about here.
Do you want to continue?
Well, then there are my own points, which
As you have the floor, you may as well.
Okay. So, and in a way, I'm even more supportive of this than the planning team. I do agree that we have to think about the height and the additional density. I mean, I think this model demonstrates that it's not another courthouse. And in some sense, from a skyline across the river, it's going to actually help the courthouse because it raises the skyline just a little bit in some places. I mean, the riverfront buildings are about 100 feet. Well, you remember 50 or 60 years ago, the Prudential got built in Boston, and here was this big, out-of-scale tower. And somebody said, you know, what we have to do is connect that tower to the financial district with a spine of towers. And that's been going on for 50 years, and it's an interesting urban design thought that big buildings in isolation are perhaps not as good as big buildings that are part of a continuity. I think, you know, the biggest, densest building is the one on Land Boulevard. I think there's some logic there. I'm going to guess that it hasn't received the same amount of architectural study, and that its conformance with the guidelines will become better when it becomes part of a PUD or design review of a building. But it doesn't seem inappropriate if you're going to add space and revenue to the site, that this is not a bad place to put it. So I'll get to my First Street comments in a second. I guess the first is sort of a general question. Right now, the existing buildings on the site are governed by a PUD permit and its amendments. And so, for example, the parking required under PUD 4 is going to be changed and diminished to maybe what's actually needed. So does that mean the PUD 4 permit needs to be amended, or is the PUD 8 superseded? But then there are the hotel and the Lotus building, which are not in 8 and are in 4. So there's a kind of a legal question that's gray to me right now, and you know, maybe the people here from Golestan and Storrs have got it all worked out, because I think it just needs to be worked out in the zoning, so that you don't, 6 months from now say, oh, wait a minute, how are we going to really do this? So I was going to think that the PUD 8 special permits requirements should require a site model. Well, I guess we don't have to require it. They're on board with models. In the dimensional regulations on page 8, it says that the residential component may be provided on any development parcel and may be provided during any phase of a multi-phase development. Now, traditionally, we require that the residential be underway before the last piece of commercial development is in some phase. I think we might want to think about that has to be done. Nobody wants a situation where the residential development is in the last phase and gets postponed as a result of less than ideal market conditions, which would presumably be the reason. Maximum building height. I think on First Street, it's the setback regime that I think needs to be put in place to make, if the heights are going to stay at 135 and 185, the setbacks can make a difference. Now, what's been shown to us, in fact, includes that the upper portions are 20 feet back from the street line and 10 feet back from the lower line. I guess I would, ask some advice from Eric, who's back there somewhere eventually. Is that what we should recommend? Should we just say, well, it'll all work out on the PUD and we'll beat them up then? The parking study should address the question of 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. The staff has that in their memo. On page 11, there's rooftop mechanical equipment noise mitigation. And I think there is a new standard that's being proposed here, that any noise or vibration emanating from a new commercial or substantially altered commercial building shall not be normally perceptible without instruments at a distance of 100 feet from the source lot line. Now, my question, I think that's a great statement of principle, but is that actually something that can be either enforced or, engineered to? So it might be prudent to have an acoustical consultant employed by the city weigh in on, is this the right language to achieve the result, which I think the result is good. You don't want to be able to hear it, but one of the difficulties with regulating noise in East Cambridge is that the background noise in lots of parts of East Cambridge is above the statutory limits. And so therefore you can't hear whether the building, and you can't measure, you can only calculate and do the best you possibly can. So that's another.
Can I interrupt you on that point?
Sure.
So I think that's part of the existing PUD4 zoning ordinance already.
So, thank you. You once again have read the things more carefully than I have, but I still think it's a question: is this something that is practical to engineer to? And then my colleague, Mr. Sinevich, keeps reminding me that if people are going to build curtain wall buildings, which is not what is being shown to us now, they have to provide sun shading devices now in this age and time in the city. And so maybe the language of materials on page 13 says that if curtain wall is permitted, then it has to have integral sun shading devices or something like that. Again, what was shown to us today was not curtain wall buildings, but we're not critiquing the renderings, we're critiquing the concept. So are these fatal flaws? No, I just think they're bits and pieces we need to advise the city council on. And I'm with everybody else that says this is an asset to the city. it's prudent to make changes so that the asset will continue to be an asset and maybe get some additional good things like housing.
Nico, you want to go next?
Sure. Sorry, just ate a cookie.
That's, of course, when you get called on.
Always. So thank you so much for this presentation. I'm strongly supportive of the zoning ordinance, of revitalizing Cambridge side, of keeping local businesses here and making East Cambridge prosperous. So I support your goals. I support the project. I'm glad that you're doing it. I agree with some of the comments that have been made, particularly by Mr. Matthews and Mr. Wasserman, that you're asking for a lot from the city, and in exchange, I think it's appropriate for the city to demand public benefits. And I'd like to see a few more public benefits incorporated into the zoning petition than are currently there. Councillor Carlone mentioned that the 20% housing requirement is too little. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that particularly. I would like to see more housing. Cambridge side is right next to Leechmere T Station. It's right near bus routes. It's right near bike lanes. It's right near the highway. This is a place in which housing should belong, especially if it's so close to additional retail. So I would encourage the City Council, when considering this ordinance, to raise the amount of housing in the overall plan. But what I'm particularly concerned about is inclusionary housing. So I see from the ordinance that this would be subject to the inclusionary housing ordinance as existing, but that's a citywide ordinance. It applies everywhere in the city, and I think it would be appropriate for there to be more inclusionary housing in this parcel than necessarily elsewhere in the city. So citywide is 20%. Looking through other ordinances, I see that the PUD 3A and 4C ordinance has 36% affordable housing, of which 58% of that is designated for middle income housing. That is a more specific requirement than the city requires overall, and it's something I would like to see incorporated into this zoning petition at a minimum, given that, especially given how close PUD 3A and 4C are, and that we just approved the zoning ordinance less than a decade ago. It's also unclear to me, looking at the text of the inclusionary zoning ordinance, whether it would require family-sized dwelling units in the new development here. I think it would, but it's not clear to me. So, as a lawyer, I would take advantage of ambiguity, and I'm sure you would too. So I would like to see that more explicit, that this would be subject to the family-sized dwelling unit ordinance. I want to make sure that, I saw in the text that there's no minimum density for the residential units, and I would like to make sure that we see some 3-bedroom units built in any new residential space to make sure that families can afford to live here and not just college students or whoever, just a bunch of studios next to the mall, to make sure that this is, part of East Cambridge's community and not just full of transient people who need housing while they're here for 4 years. I also find that this whole project, which again I strongly support, it's a project to save a mall. And historically, I think it's ironic, given that malls were the Amazon of the 20th century, that communities feared new malls because it would put local business out of business or move them away. And so now to see a mall come in and say, we're getting displaced by this new giant from Seattle, I sympathize, but I also think it's important that we don't lose sight of the local businesses that historically have been displaced by malls. And so while I'm incredibly excited about revitalizing First Street and activating First Street, I would like to see more in the ordinance to make sure that we see a diverse type of retail space on First Street, that it isn't just an extension of sort of franchise retail that exists within the mall. Looking on the other side of First Street, there's lots of local businesses and restaurants. I would like to see that on the other side as well. So I don't know necessarily what that would look like, So PUD 3A and 4C have this innovation office space, which sounds exciting, although that's for office space rather than for retail. But I'm sure that you could come up with some innovative retail space as well to encourage local businesses to take advantage of what looks like it will be prime retail space. Other options that New York City has recently discussed include a formula retail ban or a formula retail limit. Having experienced the formula retail special permitting process in Central Square, I would not copy that. But I think that a formula retail, whether it's through special permitting or through just a maximum amount of formula retail or franchise retail, I think would just be important so that the street is not just Panera, Starbucks, Panera, but things that people want to go to and that the community needs and would benefit from. So, I live in Cambridgeport. Recently, the Star Market in Cambridgeport closed, and so that has put a real hole and a need for a grocery store or supermarket in the area. But there's no good way for the city to ensure that a supermarket or something fills that space. I don't know if East Cambridge needs a supermarket right here, but I would like to see something incorporated in the ordinance that gives community input as to what retail would be useful and what retail would, help the people who are now going to live right above it on these 85-foot and higher residential areas. I could also, so other things that New York City planning has recommended include set-asides for affordable retail, so preferences for locally owned businesses or businesses that meet community retail needs. Restricting the size of storefronts to prevent the spread of just bank, Panera, requiring a storefront vacancy report so that you can work with CDD or the Small Business Assistance Program to ensure that as soon as there's a vacancy, CDD could be working with a small business elsewhere that could, not know about the vacancy but fill it. Incentive programs. I like the idea of a public market, but it's cold for most of the year. A public market outside is not going to be open for very long. So something to take advantage of the First Street space. And I'd also encourage you to think bigger about it. So, I like the bigger sidewalk, the wider sidewalk, but I think the First Street also has the potential to really, take advantage of both sides of the street and be more like a pedestrian mall. So I'm not saying that this is where, we should have a sort of Church Street like in Burlington or Pearl Street like in Boulder, but I do think that First Street here in particular would be a good site for encouraged pedestrian use that I don't see in the existing proposal. So I think that would be a strong public benefit and one that's missing from the existing ordinance. There's just no discussion about sort of what the public benefit specifically would look like, and I would like to see that in the ordinance and would encourage the City Council to consider that when they debate this. The last things I'll just say quickly, I agree with Mr. Matthews and Mr. Wasserman that open space and transportation is really important. Just skimming through the plan that Councilor Carlone provided, I was struck by this history of Leechmere Canal being on it was planned to be the jewel of Cambridge with a public park designed by the Olmsted brothers. And while, I run by here literally every day and take advantage of the open space and really enjoy it. I do think it could be better connected with the Monsignor O'Brien Highway because there's these stairs that go from the highway down to the canal. It's frequently dirty or there's litter and there isn't a lot of pathfinding. So making sure that this is integrated, because this is in the middle of 3 big projects that the planning board keeps seeing. The North Point, the Alexandria, and this. And there's just going to be a lot of residential space and a lot of retail space. And right now I don't see a strong connection between the 3 of them, and you're in the middle. So I would like to make sure that as, being the geographic bridge between these 2 big developments that the planning board has seen over and over, you really fulfill that role of providing the linkage for the public to go from one to the other. And yeah, so again, I strongly support this, but I think this is a good opportunity for including more public benefits that would make this a permanent feature of East Cambridge for years to come. So thank you.
Corinne?
You have a lot of technology over here. So I second pretty much everything that my colleague Nico said about pushing for more public benefits and about being thoughtful about how these changes can benefit the community, making sure that we're getting something in return for what is being given. I have a question that I think might be for our chair or for staff. I'm wondering why we're looking at a PUD zoning instead of a special permit for this. Like, why this process?
Jeff, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to take a crack at it first? So my understanding, and Jeff will correct me when I get this wrong, is that what they're looking to do does not currently fit within the zoning that for the area. They could not get a special permit for it, so they need to rezone first, and then they would get a special permit under the new zoning. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Yay!
And I'll add. So I'll add that this is a. This is PUD overlay zoning, which means it's kind of like an enabling zoning that then it sets the overall parameters for mix of uses, density, height, other requirements, benefits that get incorporated into the development project. It sets kind of an overall set of parameters, and then the project has to come to the planning board for a series of 2 public hearings at a minimum in order to get approval for a specific development plan.
So there are many things I like about the project, but this meta question of like rezoning versus special permit, I understand now that special permit isn't possible, but we recently rejected someone requesting a rezoning for their specific little building, and I have questions about that precedent, about saying, sure, we'll create a new zoning ordinance that benefits only one owner. I have concerns about that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but it does concern me. I am wondering, and this is not something that needs to be answered right now, but just thoughts that I have for Cambridge side, why this is being done. So you already came to us for approval for a special permit for offices on the 3rd floor, and I was under the impression that that was to make sure that we could keep the mall, we could salvage the mall or keep it open, which I do think is important. So I'm wondering now, when this idea came up of this much grander project, and if it's something new that's coming up after you all came in December, or if it's something that was being thought of then and the December was just sort of an incremental step in getting public opinion or getting sort of us to be on board with what people are calling saving the mall. I do think that Councillor Carlone's question about whether this is necessary to save the mall is a question to think about, because a lot of the public opinion that's sort of being presented to us is that we want to save the mall or keep it from being a ghost block, but I'm not sure that that's as honest as saying that there's a great financial opportunity if this PUD were approved, if this rezoning were approved. There'd be great financial benefit. I'm not against financial benefit, but if something is for financial benefit, I want to think about it in that way and think about who's benefiting, and then also think about who might be harmed and mitigate any of that harm. And towards that end, I do want to know how long construction will take, and how long construction will be happening on First Street, and how long construction will impact Edlin Land Boulevard, because those are already places that are very difficult to navigate for people who are trying to get to and from work or to daycare, or just to get home after work. I also want to hear next time who Cambridge side spoke to in the community. I particularly care that you're speaking with a wide representation of people at different income levels, because those of us at different income levels interact with the city in different ways. So exciting new retail might benefit a group who has a certain kind of job, and it might not benefit someone who lives in housing projects. And I want to know if this new development is going to, how this will benefit someone who lives in Roosevelt Towers versus how it will benefit someone who is working in Kendall Square and walks down to Cambridge side for something interesting to do, or perhaps because they live in the cool new housing units there. I think that it's important to be clear about the total GSF we're talking about, because we keep talking about this new GSF, but I think it's very important to Councillor Carlone's point that we're talking about 1 million plus square feet. So I want to be honest and transparent when we talk about the square footage, and I want to know if we are talking about 1 million plus square feet, why we're not using that as the measure for the housing that we'd require. Why would we only take the 623,000 square feet net addition? Those are my main concerns, except for one. I'm concerned about flooding. I was looking at the 100-year storm maps for 2030, and this property is very vulnerable, so I wanted to make sure we think about how that affects retail tenants, residential tenants, and again, just to push a little harder on public benefits.
Thank you. Ted, you want to take the next crack at this?
Sure. So my comments mostly relate to the language of the text. I mean, I concur with pretty much everything everyone has said already. I think it is necessary to do something to make sure that this is a viable operation. You know, we're beyond where we were 30 plus years ago. We have this there now, and I think it does need to be viable. I accept that the New England development people can probably walk on the water of the canal, but I have a lot of questions about the text, and I'd like to go through those, and some of them, you know, may need to be referred to the city solicitor. And I apologize if this is boring. Starting with 13.102.1, it was actually pointed out in the CDD memo. It's unclear exactly how it's determined whether something is an eligible development parcel, whether it contains at least 100,000 square feet of retail and a restaurant space is measured now or is measured after the development parcel is developed. And so I think that needs to be clarified. I also think it needs to be clarified whether there is going to be only one development parcel or whether it's conceivable that there would be more than one development parcel, because then are we doubling up on everything that can be allowed in terms of floor area and height and other things. In section 102.2, I may be wrong, but I don't think anywhere else in the zoning ordinance does it say that the planning board shall grant a special permit. It is certainly true that shall is used throughout the ordinance to say things that the planning board has to consider. It's also clear that with regard to special permits, it is assumed that if you comply with all the terms, you will be granted a special permit, but theoretically special permits are still discretionary on this board, and I don't think it's appropriate to say, to bind the board that it shall grant it. Similarly, in section 102.2, where it's talking about what are essentially minor amendments that can be done on just written approval, it talks about a reconfiguration or a reallocation of heights of buildings, and I certainly don't think that is appropriate, where clearly the height is a major issue that the board has to discuss, and if it were to grant a final development plan based on certain heights, I don't think essentially that should be a minor amendment. In section 102.5, where it talks about common ownership, this is for the developer. I think they might also want to put in a reference that if they have a long-term lease rights, that's equivalent or good enough for fee ownership or enforceable easement rights. In in section 102.8, and this is one that certainly I think this city solicitor might want to look at. It basically waives lapses, and it basically says that the rights under the special permit, once they vest, are there forever and they can't be challenged. It is conceivable that our building department, as good as they are, could make a mistake, and it is clear under state law that if a building department makes a mistake, that can still be corrected. It also appears to take away appeal rights and challenges that people may have. It says for which a building permit has been issued, then it takes precedence over everything else. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that's changing state law, and I don't think we want to have them give away any possible challenge that somebody may have. We're hoping that the plan is great, the special permit and the PUD is great, and that nobody would challenge it. But if somebody has a valid challenge, I think they're entitled to their day in court. Section 102.10 about conflict says that the special permit and the PUD would take precedence over anything else in the zoning ordinance or any other City of Cambridge ordinance or regulation. I think that is much broader than it should be. Certainly there may be things, noise ordinance, light ordinance, or something else that they will simply have to comply with. Section 104.1, where it talks about permitted gross floor area. Again, that goes back to my comments about the possibility that there could be more than one development parcel, and then how do we define what the net gross floor area is, and whether it applies in more than one instance. That's section sub D about inclusionary zoning. Others have spoken about whether 20% is correct, and I think that's up for City Council to decide. But I certainly think that if it were going to be based on the 20% and the current inclusionary housing provisions, it ought to say either what's current, the minimum of what's current, or what any increase that may happen. We've had that raised before with regard to, I think, some things in Cambridge Crossing and some other long PUD projects, that if everyone else has to comply with a higher standard, and this is being phased in, they should have to comply with that higher standard. Section 105.1 makes a reference to a non-existing section, subject to the provisions of 13.IV.B below. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's a typo, obviously. Obviously, traffic and transportation have to weigh in on parking and how that's going to work. Section 106.6 seems to say they don't need to have any loading facilities. I think that needs to be clarified exactly where the loading is going to be and whether what exists now under PUD 4 would be sufficient. I think, again, that's something traffic and parking have to weigh in on. With regard to rooftop mechanical equipment, and I think that's in 107.2. It may come in later too. I realize there are some regulations that prevent there being screening of everything, especially if there were labs. But I think it ought to be required in here that they must screen the mechanicals to the fullest extent that's allowed by law, so that there will indeed be screening. I guess that's 107.4, and I had no idea in 107.43 sub G what it was talking about with regard to zoning relief to permit construction of a cogeneration facility or other energy system. I mean, maybe this is a good thing that should be in here, but I just didn't know what it really meant. Those were my questions that I see just from the language of the ordinance. I appreciate the model because I really think it does help visualize things. The building on Land Boulevard I never really saw from any of the materials, and so I was a little surprised to see it there today. It strikes me the question about lab buildings is a very valid question, whether there should be lab buildings in here, and if so, whether they should be basically surrounding the residential. Just looking at the proposal today, it seemed to me maybe the building on Land Boulevard ought to be where the residential component is located, and then if there were lab buildings or offices, they're on the other side, and so they're separated somewhat else. I think the views for the residents would be better. I concur with really most everything else that's been raised this evening. Certainly the idea of the total amount of gross square footage and the amount of additional building that the city would be giving away, that there probably ought to be some greater share of public benefit. Certainly the concept of a footpath across the river sounds intriguing, but I would imagine that that's like a 20-year project to get that permitted if anyone would ever allow it.
Well,
seeing as how long we've been trying to get
It's been part of plans for the Charles River Basin for 25 years.
Right, and has it ever proceeded anywhere?
The state had the opinion that it did not constitute mitigation for the highway bridge, that you couldn't be seen or vice versa from each other because of the museum. But in the connectivity study, it's been in the plan that this is a very useful connection to make.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, it sounds great, but half of it's in Boston, so.
Right. It's one of the problems with regulating the river.
Right. Anyway, those were my comments.
Great. Thank you. Tom, you want to go next?
Sure, just as long as I don't have to go last.
I'm mixing it up tonight.
Thank you.
And keeping everyone on their toes.
Okay. Yes, I'd say Mr. Karp's a visionary. Just thank you for the historical pictures and what he took of a sow's ear and turned it into the silk purse of its time. And we appreciate that, and we also appreciate now that there's a necessary transformation that has to happen. I also appreciate the perspective that Dennis brought to this, and he should take some satisfaction in the fruition of his urban design thinking from 40 years ago, which has taken us to this point. But obviously, nobody expects that a city is frozen in time. Nobody expects that you move someplace and that it'll just stay the way it is. That's a presumption that I think that none of us have. Cities change; they have to change. New people come in, new things happen, and you change with your city. Otherwise, potentially it becomes uncomfortable, and I think everybody understands that. But some of the things that have changed since 1978 have been pointed out tonight. Realization that maybe the mall mauled First Street, as Dennis pointed out, and that it's time to undo that. There was good reasons for it back then. But a recognition that times have changed and we should change that. I think we also understand that density is good in a way that we did in 1978, but there's more imperative and intensity about that around transportation nodes and in cities, the future of the planet will depend on us densifying in a rational way. So that relates to the issue of height. So I think that has changed. I think Corinne's an advocate, as are many of us on this board, of housing. There's a housing crisis here, more housing, and the timetable of how that is dovetailed into how this project and special permit and PUD gets drafted is critical, and I expect the City Council will be all over that. So Mr. Karp was a visionary in putting some people called him crazy for putting the parking under ground right next to the river. He was able to do that, but now there's a liability, there's a danger there with rising sea levels and the danger of flooding. I would really want to understand, how do you protect that important parking lot to prevent it from becoming the largest Olympic pool in Cambridge. Some comments. There was a request for, what's the feeling of the board relative to laboratory uses at the site. That's another thing that's changed since 1978. I think people in that age didn't anticipate the importance of that industry to the region, to the nation, and to the world. I am in favor of labs here to begin to help satisfy the need for that critical industry. But there's no question we've learned that labs have an effect on the community. Noise has been referenced already, and I liked some of the details that have been asked about that. Light is also an issue with those commercial buildings, with lab buildings in particular, where people work long hours. I'd like to understand ways in which we could memorialize some mitigation of the effects, not just of noise, but also of light, of the laboratory use here. So I had a couple of questions that really probably more properly land in the special permit phase. There's a reference in the material to how we're going to bring light into the buildings, but yet there are a couple of buildings proposed up against the mall, very deep floor plates. How do those floor plates actually work, given that one side of it is backed up against an existing building like that? Understanding that section would be great. And then I think, just looking at my notes, relative to height, I'm on record now saying I don't understand actually how we arrive at two things, and again, I'm inspired by Dennis Carlone. Why 625,000 square feet? Why isn't it 925,000 square feet or 325,000 square feet? I don't know what the right number is. There's no question that has value, but if we're rezoning this, I'd sure like to do that in a rational way. And similarly with the height, the model is a fantastic tool. I came in here tonight thinking 185 feet, is that really what we need here? And I, going over the bridge on the way here on the red line, looked over and said, is that, trying to judge what 185, the model allayed my fears about the height. And that relates to the question of density, that I think it's appropriate. And I think the 185, but how we arrive at 185 or 155 or 200, I don't know. I'd really like to understand that as well. And lastly, relative to sustainability, the city has spent a lot of time thinking about a future of net zero, and spent a lot of time documenting what that might mean. And in fact, commercial buildings are on a timetable, not yet ordained, but to reach pretty high for how we mitigate the carbon impact That certainly has changed, an issue changed since 1978. Carbon impact of future development. I'd sure like to know how this thing would move to net zero. A cogeneration plant, by the way, Ted, runs on carbon fuel, and that may not be a great solution, and not necessarily one that's even considered sustainable these days. So understanding how, what the plans are and what the reach is relative to those issues. So I think I've gone on long enough. Thank you.
Okay. Lou?
This is a tough act to follow. Small retail, maybe you should bring the push carts back, Rich. Just had to get a historical mark there. I think it's all been said. I mean, I like the idea of breaking down this big block. I think that'll help a lot, and I think that'll help a lot on First Street. I like the pushing back of the street wall and adding a little extra sidewalk. Not afraid of the height and density. Tall buildings on Lamb Boulevard. It's across the street from a hotel that's pretty large itself. I was kind of surprised that you didn't use the Sears building for the residential part. You may have legitimate. I'm just curious why. It's across the street from a residential use already. Kind of a low-scale building. Would like to see more residential if you could get it in there. That's I was surprised at the relatively low number. Let's see. I did have a concern with the flooding in the garage. I was curious how you're going to handle that. Some of the language that Ted picked up, I did the shall issue, and the loading really kind of bothered me. I didn't know where you were going to end up there. So, just to reinforce, I guess, everyone's thoughts. I think it's a great project. I think you've been a good corporate neighbor, and you helped the city out a lot. I'd like to see you succeed. So, continue. We'll see you soon.
Okay, Steve?
Much has been said already, and so I never feel the need to repeat what those have already said. Let me first say that it's a fabulous project and a fabulous proposal. We heard from you a few months ago, and I thought that you were done with your proposal, with you're changing the upper floor. I don't know whether I guess you must have had this in mind at that point, or perhaps you found that halfway measure simply wasn't sufficient to make this work. So I was surprised, but I guess ultimately pleased to see this further permutation of the project. It's also unique and remarkable to hear from so many people, and though there were a few suggestions here and there was really no opposition or criticism of any great consequence, and it must have cost you a lot of money to pay off all of those people. But it's a big project, so you can afford that. Really, that's remarkable and speaks well. For the substance of the project, and presumably, for the work you did speaking to folks in the neighborhood. So, having said all of that, and again emphasizing my strong support, I do have a few thoughts, largely repeating, but quickly emphasizing some of what I've heard from my colleagues here. First of all. Benefits. This is a big project. You're adding 600 some odd thousand feet here. That's got enormous value. I don't know exactly what that number is, but whether you multiply that by 100 or 200 or $500 a foot, it's a big number, and that's great. I'm a developer myself, and I don't begrudge good developers doing good work and making a good buck along the way. But I also know that this organization and Steve Karp and the others are real civic minded. We heard some of that, and bearing that in mind, I really would like to hear more about the benefits on this project. I want to be absolutely clear that neither I nor anybody on this board would want to do anything that would undermine the economic viability of this project. We want this to happen. We're supportive of it. But I think that this project can and should support some great benefits for the community. I think we've heard some reference to that, and I have absolutely no question in my mind of your sort of moral and other commitment to provide those sort of benefits to the community. I'd like to hear more about them. Along the same lines of benefits, I frequently speak out in favor of affordable housing in contexts like this. Last time around, I was one of the strongest advocates for pushing that number up to 20%. In a project like this, and as we're talking about benefits, it seems to me that this may well be a good instance and an opportunity to increase that number. I've also been a strong advocate not only for affordable, low-income housing, but for middle income housing. And I would really ask and urge you to speak to staff about the opportunities for perhaps adding a 5 or 10% portion of units for affordable housing. It's a great location for, when I say affordable, I'm sorry, for middle income housing. As I frequently said here, I really fear that Cambridge is becoming this classic donut community where we provide housing for the wealthy, i.e. market, and we provide a great deal of housing for low income. And the donut is the hole in the donut. The middle income folks who cannot afford the market housing but do not qualify for the low income housing. I think this is a great opportunity to address that hole and address that enormous need in the community. One other item is parking. Parking is such an issue in this area, and I think your garage provides parking for folks who don't just use the mall, but you work and go elsewhere as well. I don't know how that really plays out. I would just like to get a better understanding of parking, the impact of this project on parking needs, to what extent the diminution of parking here is going to have an impact on the community. So I think there should be a fairly rigorous parking study as part of this process before we decide to go ahead on the rezoning. Beyond that, I guess I had some questions about the height on Land Boulevard. I guess I had more. I wish I had more time to really think about and peruse that, and I guess part of it is we're looking at some models and a specific proposal, but of course the zoning proposal is broader and permits other things other than the specific models that we're looking at here. I mean, the final proposal could be something different, and I guess. I would like to get a better understanding of what the impact of the height, and I guess when I say the height, I'm only talking about the tallest portion, the 185 section. It may turn out to be fine, but again, I just feel that I'd like to get a better handle on what that means and what it could mean. I think that covers. Well, I guess the one other thing is the lab issue. I've heard some concerns about it. And I think the concerns expressed are legitimate, and I guess I'd like to hear and I guess be persuaded that the permitted lab use is really important, is really essential for your vision. As a developer, I'm sure you want as much flexibility as you can, as many options as you can acquire for your development. I certainly understand that, but I wonder whether it's really essential to the economics of the project. So I went through a bunch of questions and criticisms there, but I just want to close by reiterating my first point. It's a great project. It's a great addition to the neighborhood. It's a great way of fixing the difficulties that retail is experiencing over there. The workers and residents that you'll be providing there hopefully will not do all of their shopping on Amazon and will actually come downstairs and buy some stuff. That can't hurt the retail. So I thank you and encourage you on the project, but I do hope that you address some of those other issues that I and the others have raised.
Mary?
I don't think I have anything new to add. It's probably just kind of supporting and reiterating what my colleagues have said. I, too, am very supportive of the project. I mean, this the mall has been, kind of the centerpiece of the Riverfront project for many years, and it's clear that New England Development has been a great neighbor and continues to be so. And I'd like to see that continue into the future. And, it's amazing to me that it's, 30 years or whatever since I was working at community development not long after Dennis finished the study. So life does go by quickly. So I think, it's time for an update. I love the First Street activation. It's something that I think we always wanted, but given the economy and the times back 30 years ago, it was hard to figure out how to do it. So if we can accomplish that now, I think that would be tremendous. I like the idea of just kind of breaking down that facade as well as activating it. The housing, to me, is a critical point, and I would like to see more of it. I'd rather see more housing than necessarily the office or the lab space. I know it's all, it all factors in differently in terms of your economic model. But I think that would not only give a boost to the city in terms of providing housing units and more affordable units, but I think it will also help the retail by just, increasing the number of people living in the area who will shop in the stores. I'd like very much to see follow up on some of Nico's ideas for ways to strengthen that First Street corridor in terms of, promoting smaller businesses, local businesses, give people, the entrepreneurs of the future sort of a way to, and a place to begin. I would also ask you to think about Steve's comment about the middle income housing, because he and I do agree on this point. It's, that's the niche that nobody ever seems to be able to address. And, we realize there are trade-offs. People decide whether they want more space or whether they want to be in Cambridge, and sometimes, it doesn't, they purposely go someplace else because they want a bigger backyard or whatever. But I think there are plenty of people who were in that middle income tier renting, or, the sons and daughters of long-term residents who would love to stay in the city, and it would be nice to have more opportunity for them as well. I think in terms of the height issue, my first thought when I was reading it was that 185 was too high. When I saw this incredible model, I felt better about the 185 along Land Boulevard. And yet then when I saw the image in the presentation, I got scared again because it seemed very, very big. Now I know that image hasn't, it's very early, so things are going to change. And so I don't know that if that's the right number. And again, it goes back to the question of, is the 600,000 the right number? Is the 185 the right number? I'm not sure how we determine what that is. But let me just say that I'm open to increased height. I don't know whether it's 150 or 185, or it needs, more thought. And I guess understanding a little bit more about the economics of a project, and also getting a sense of, the whole kind of traffic analysis and how the different uses play into that would be helpful in terms of deciding just what the right mix is. The benefits, I think, is the thing to really think about. I think if we were to, or recommend to the council that they upzone it to the 600,000, I would like to see a lot more in terms of public benefits too. And I do think that the suggestion of trying to do that walkway over towards Boston is a great idea, as is trying to do something with the DCR building. I think that is also something that we thought about many, many years ago, but it really always has been a question of money and who pays for it. But, you could have a wonderful community facility over there. It would just kind of tie the whole thing together. And I do think, too, also thinking about the connections to Kendall and to the North Point area, with CSX, I guess now, is important. The labs, I'm not against labs being in the area. I think it's really a question of where in the area they're located, as some of my colleagues have said. And so, I realize it's the first crack at this, at least from our seeing it. I know you've been studying it quite a bit, but maybe it is that you move the housing over towards the boulevard and put the lab space sort of more, in the center of the mix, maybe on First Street. But just something to think about. So I'm sorry that I've restated a lot of what other people have, but all in all, I think it's great, and I look forward to seeing this evolve.
Okay. So I just have a couple of things I want to emphasize. I think one of the reasons it's most important to enshrine the public benefit in the zoning is because New England Development may not be the company that owns this parcel forever. And obviously we all hope they will, but certainly trends in real estate, in shopping mall real estate in particular, suggest a certain amount of consolidation. And while New England Development has been an incredible neighbor and partner to the city for its entire history, we need to, say what we expect of the owner of this important piece of land, whoever it is. And I would assume that it would be someone who would meet that same standard of community involvement and want to do the same level of community benefit we would expect from New England Development, but it really does need to be enshrined there for that reason. Similarly, I think it's helpful to take a look back at the broader context of the PUD4. A lot of the public benefits of that development are now met on parcels that are not part of this development. And so understanding how the two interact, and likewise, I think some of the parking for other parts of PUD4 are now met here. So I think as we try to separate those out, understanding what's met where and how these will interact will be important, not just for this board and for city council, certainly for the lawyers of all the other people and potential buyers, for the folks in PUD4. untangling that now will make it easier on everyone, and frankly, easier for us to understand what public benefits essentially come with the mall already, and what ones are traveling with the remainder of PUD4. I think that, to me, also gets to Corinne's question of why just this piece? Why not think of it as the whole? I'm not sure that one is better than the other. I do think the fact that this is such a large parcel differentiates it from spot zoning that you might see with an individual single-family home in a residential neighborhood. But you are carving out a part of a previously planned area, and a justification for that should be made, and the implications for the whole planned area are something this board would need to understand. It's already been said, I think, but I'll emphasize the parking and transportation part needs to be explained. I know from many discussions over many years that there is underutilized capacity at the mall. However, as you're adding a lot of square feet, understanding how much of that capacity goes away, and frankly, how much is already under a long-term commitment to, by lease or easement, to your neighbors is important, because there's a lot of that that's gone on as New England Development has appropriately tried to make use of an important resource for parking that has provided a relief valve for the community. I do think the points about available transit in the area are well taken, but I also think how New England Development can contribute to the furtherance of those needs to be better explored. Not just the pedestrian and bike connections, although certainly activating First Street and widening that sidewalk will make a big difference in that. I had the same concern others had about mechanicals right next to the housing. I'm not going to reiterate all the points that have been made about that, but that was my first reaction on seeing the juxtaposition in the image was, oh great, there's housing right up against those mechanicals. There can be better planning on that, I think, and you'll have more chances to address that. I had something else, and it just went away. No. It happens. I'm sure others have covered it more eloquently than I have. I think what you're hearing from this board as a whole is this is a place where we think that a certain amount of additional development is appropriate. We think like we hold all developers in Cambridge to a high standard, and when we are giving large numbers of square feet, we expect commensurate benefits and to the community, and we want to understand and enshrine those appropriately so that, frankly, when we do get to the PUD special permit stage, the onus, it's very clear what the board is empowered to do and not to do, and what the mitigation at that stage should be. That you know, we're laying out that framework now so that we can all have greater certainty later. I would also like to thank Ted especially for the incredibly detailed and important work of going through the text. Hopefully there will you will get continued feedback like that from staff as well as this review goes forward. But that's really valuable work and time consuming. So I appreciate that a lot. So I think what you're hearing is general support, but we want to hear more, and we're not quite ready to forward this for recommendation yet. Hugh.
So I'm not disagreeing with your summary at all, but I'm sort of thinking, well, what specifically do we want to hear more about, and what more do we need to do? One thing that seemed to be clear to me was in the benefits question, often that's ending up in a side agreement at the council, but we've identified a few things that we think are important as benefits, and we have to flesh that out some more. The middle income housing, the open space connections are things that immediately come to mind as things that we seem to agree quite a bit
Well,
about.
and I think the obvious connection to things around the river, so the connection,
Yeah.
maybe it's docks rather than, that connection in front of the Science Museum across the river. It's the boathouse, which was mentioned a couple of times. It would be great for the rowing program at Cambridge Fringe and Latin if that was their boathouse. There's a not-for-profit trying to build a swimming pool in the Charles with advanced technology. It's on the Cambridge side. That would be, that kind of thing that relates to the river, that recognizes the proximity and the impact of this development on the Charles River.
And I guess I would say that I'm always hesitant to specify things that are not wholly within either the developer or the city's control, like things controlled by DCR or Mass Highway. But I think the scale of the contribution, the links to open space, those kinds of things are things that are appropriate for this board to hear a commitment on. And you're right, in terms of the actual dollar amounts or projects that may be worked out at council. But I think in terms of other things we've asked to hear about, more about how the economics of the project does work and how do we arrive at the right number of square feet and parking and height. Does it matter to you where the labs go? Oh, what I was thinking of was, why are we keeping the Sears building? Because the sidewalk would seem to be nicer if we bumped that one back too. The parking, noise.
So you know that the Sears building isn't owned by New England Development. So that introduces more complications in this plan.
Well, so I was aware that is currently the case. I think that also gets to Ted's point about how many parcels are we talking about here? And how does that impact everything? So, I think we've, as a board, identified a number of kind of open questions that we need greater clarity about before we're ready to advance this, and public benefits is certainly a big one. I think the council plays a much more hands-on role in figuring out exactly what shape those take, especially once you get past the amount of inclusionary and middle-income housing to more specific projects. But anything else from anyone on this matter? Going once? Okay, I think that's it on this for tonight. I'm going to give the board a quick break here to stand up and stretch your legs before we do our BZA cases, and then we'll come back and do this.
Chair, are you going to continue this meeting formally to your...
Yes, we are continuing this hearing formally. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. It's 9:45 here, and we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda. Thank you. Okay. So we have a couple of BZA cases here that the board asked to see and decide whether or not we want to send comments to the BZA on. Holt School, or do you all want to go first? Sure.
Yeah, we're ready. My name is Richard McKinnon. I'm here with Richard Rudman, our attorney, and Maggie O'Neill from E.F. Holt. And I don't take personally what Jeff had to say earlier about a very exciting sign variance application. So anyway, obviously my other side of the evening held you up for a long time. I'm going to have Richard come up, just speak briefly to the BZA aspects of it, and then Maggie has a small presentation if she could do that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Madam Chairman, members of the board, my name is Richard Rudman from DLA Piper. We're legal counsel for EF on their real estate project in Cambridge. We're here before you on a request that EF is making for 2 sign variances for what I would call a sign and a decorative symbol, Maggie will explain, on the EF3 building, which is now under construction at the corner of the Gilmore Bridge and the ramps, North Point Boulevard, and the ramps for I-93. The variances that are being requested are, first of all, a height variance. The EF3 building is located right next to the Gilmore Bridge, which is elevated, right next to the highway ramps, which are elevated. A sign at 20 feet, which is the permitted height, would not be visible to important passersby. We are requesting a variance to allow signage to be put at the top of the building with the name HALT. And those signs, because of the height at the top of the building, would exceed the sign limit for individual signs of 60 square feet. The total amount of signage which is proposed complies with the total sign limit in the zoning code. There is permitted by the zoning code, because of the size of the building, up to 550 square feet of signage, and the signage which is being proposed here is about 485 square feet. So we are trying as much as possible to live within the requirements of the zoning code. There is no internal illumination for these signs, but EF does feel that it's important to have signage at the top of the building where it's visible and can be seen, especially for people who are traveling by the orange line from the community college station. So having said that, let me introduce Maggie, who will walk you through the specific proposal.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Chair Connolly and members of the board for having us this evening. My name is Maggie O'Neill. I am a member of the project team for EF3. As you are all familiar, EF3 is, or as we affectionately call it, Holt House, is one of 4 buildings on our campus in the North Point area of Cambridge. It's going to be a new residential building for Holt International Business School. You can see clearly on this map to the north, it's flanked by 93 and Route 1 on-ramps. To the west, we have the Reyes-Gilmore Bridge and the 2020 building. To the south, Regatta Towers and North Point Boulevard. And then to the east, we have the MWRA station. So I'll just quickly sort of walk you through what we're proposing in terms of signage. We, as always, have an active dialogue with our neighbors on this project. So we have met with the Regatta Towers, and we're really grateful to have their support for our proposal. We've also met several times with the East Cambridge planning team going back to December of this year. This was during the design phase. We spoke with them, we got their feedback, we incorporated it and made some changes, and we're grateful to have their support as well. Originally, we had proposed, as you can see here, 2 signs. These were both to be mounted on the rooftop screen. One was in the northwest corner of the building, sort of facing 93 and Charlestown. That was a Holt sign painted on the screen, accompanied with a crest representing Holt International Business School. And we were also proposing at the time a second version of that, mounted on the southwest corner of the building facing Cambridge and Regatta Towers. So it originally looked something like this. Sort of see the northwest corner on the left side there and the southwest corner on the right side. And after speaking with our neighbors and really incorporating their feedback, we're now proposing just the back corner sign. So this is the northwest corner sign facing 93, the Gilmore Bridge, the Community College Orange Line Station, and Charlestown. We've decided not to pursue signage on the front of the building facing Cambridge and the Regatta Tower. So you can see here, this is just painted directly onto the screen wall at the penthouse. It reads Holt. It has modest uplighting until 9 p.m. and then below it is the crest representing Holt International Business School, and this will be powder-coated steel with some modest backlighting again until 9 p.m. Here's a look at what it would look like by night. The 9 p.m. that we've decided is really a result of dialogue with our neighbors in Charlestown, and we're trying to be really mindful of keeping the amount of light that we're shining through their windows at a minimum. This is a look at the size and the height of the HALT painted sign that we're proposing. And the same thing here for the crest to be mounted on the building. So that's really what we're looking at in terms of the signage that we're proposing, and I do want to be mindful of everybody's time here, but just really briefly walk you through why we feel like this is the best location for the proposal. I'm not going to go into the specifics of the Holt International Business School. You're all quite familiar. It's a really unique program in that the students, we have MBA program, master's programs, and a brand new undergraduate campus that just opened. And students can rotate through this campus and our campuses globally. So that makes it really unique. But what's also really unique about the program is our student body itself. So actually just heard an updated statistic. We're up to 170 nationalities in the student body, and no more than one country is not represented by more than 7% of the student body. So it's really unique. We have students from all over, tons of languages. It's a really fun area to be and work every day. We have 500 beds in the new EF3 building, and we're expecting about 1,200 students on campus between all the programs. So we're trying to house a lot of them, but we won't be able to house all of them. And so that does mean that a lot of students are commuting to campus. We have a lot of international students. We have a lot of visitors to the campus, as well as faculty that may be visiting or commuting. So it's a heavily commuter campus. And the reason that we want to propose the sign in this location is so that it can act as sort of a wayfinding piece. I'll show you in a minute, but many of our students and visitors are coming from the Orange Line. And so we want it to be really visible and sort of welcoming so they clearly understand where they're going when they're coming to campus. Here's just a quick look. We're really proud to offer this to our students. It's access to tons of different public transit options. So 2 Green Line stations within walking distance of the campus. The Orange Line Community College station is there. The MBTA buses run quite frequently, and EF does operate a shuttle that will take EF staff and HALT students to the Red Line stations quite frequently. EF does comply with the PTDM, which means that we, of course, survey our staff and HALT students annually. You all know from our town and gown presentation, but we have a really high percentage of students and staff, about 80%, come to our campus with public transit, walking, or biking. So that's a really high statistic that we're proud of. And of that 80% or so, about 40-45% are coming from the Orange Line. So often people are coming off of the Orange Line. HALT students in particular can be quite price sensitive, so they're living in Medford, Everett, places in that direction. They're coming from the Orange Line, walking across the Gilmore Bridge, down the stairs by 2020, and around. So, of course, being located with a lot of public transit options nearby does mean we have a lot of infrastructure. So we really do want this to be a wayfinding piece, and if it were mounted at 20 feet off the ground, you really wouldn't be able to see it. You can see where we have the 93 ramps around, lots and lots of stuff that sort of compromises the visibility of the site, especially for people who might not have been there before. And then finally, these are just some photos that I actually took. I'm a commuter myself, and I took these directly from the Orange Line station. The one on the right is stepping off of the car directly onto the platform. It can be quite disorienting, especially if you're not familiar with the area, but one thing that is always visible is that northwest corner of our building, and it's visible sort of all from the second you get off of the train all the way down the Gilmore Bridge, down the stairs, and to the building. So we're hoping it can be quite welcoming. So here's a final look. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate being here, and we'll be here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a BZA case. We've been asked to weigh in on whether or not we have a recommendation on it. We do have a letter in support from the East Cambridge Planning Team. Does anyone want to comment? Liza? Yes.
And there's also one that was forwarded today, maybe you didn't get it, is from the Regatta Riverview, and they have also spoken in support, voted in support.
Thank you. Yep.
I have a question for Liza.
Someone hand Liza the mic. Yep, I'll stand up.
Well, for those at home.
So is the shield considered a sign?
Yes.
If it were incised into the siding, would it still be a sign?
Yes.
If it were painted across the top as a decorative element, just
Yes.
it would still be. When does something become a sign rather than a decoration?
So if it's a logo, text, or graphics that is associated with the use that's located inside the structure, it's a sign.
Okay.
So for example, coffee beans on a mural on Shepherd Street outside the Starbucks is a sign. Coffee beans outside Marathon Sports are art.
Sure. Yep. Yep. Okay.
All right. I understand. Thank you.
You.
I think the rationale for the sign and the shield are fine. I think it would look better if the HULT was about 3/4 or 80% the size that it presently is. Just to have a little more sort of margin around it. That's purely aesthetic. That's my comment.
Okay. Tom?
I'm going to be the contrarian. I mean, in the age of this, I don't buy the wayfinding, and I think it's a bad precedent to brand the building, and because that's what that is. It's a brand for the highway, and it won't be long before there are other people in here making the wayfinding argument, which we've heard a lot, and so I'd say area of the sign, fine. Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. Keep it below 20 feet, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, my concept of branding has been changing based on some recent travels, but I do agree with Tom that if we have an ordinance, then we ought to stick to the ordinance unless there's a real reason not to. Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of like the way it looks, but this BZA wouldn't let Leslie hang banners saying Leslie College on their new dormitory, and I can't think of, there probably is some place where it says Harvard somewhere, but I can't think of any big buildings that say Harvard up at top so that you can see it. And maybe we ought to consider again changing the sign ordinance, but until it's done, I think we ought to just stick with it rather than willy-nilly changing things.
So, what would you guys think if the word HULT moved down so that it was 20 feet above a datum that wasn't the ground, but was some datum that related to the front?
From the bridge?
Yeah, so say from the bridge, so that it might occur on there's a sort of the first double story, that's the first residential one, or something that.
But no matter where you put it, isn't it still just advertising? I mean, nobody needs us to find this building.
No, but they're allowed to advertise 20 feet or lower. And the cool thing about what my colleague is suggesting is it relates to statutory hardship. It's the particular site conditions that occur here at this site that might be a pretty good argument for hardship. That actually the benchmark for ground is ambiguous, and that maybe it more properly belongs at the elevation of the bridge surface.
But doesn't that also make the question of where you're looking at this building from?
Yeah.
It may only be on one face of this building, right?
Right.
So is that where the sign goes, or?
There's also the size of the sign, isn't there? Yes. You know, I have difficulty with these because, you know, I think the proposal is perfectly reasonable and attractive, and I think that well-designed, well-conceived, well-constructed signs on buildings are fine and add to the environment, except that we have a law which says exactly the opposite. Right. But it's a variance. You know, clearly it's not permitted under the law, but it's a variance. And you know, there's some flexibility in how boards you treat the concept of variances. You know, I'd be inclined, to say to the ZBA that we think the sign itself is fine and reasonable and tasteful, and we offer no opinion on the legal issue. It's a quandary for me.
Mary?
Yes, it is a quandary. So I actually like the sign, and having driven through that area for many years, I can understand why you would want to have it up there. I also understand that it doesn't meet the legal requirements, but I'm also not sure that it would look attractive at the location that Hugh is suggesting. I mean, I like the rationale for the suggestion. I just, I mean, it seems like the type of sign that should be up at the top of a building as opposed to sort of floating in the middle, in a way. So I don't know that helps. I don't think it does.
The ZBA doesn't pay any attention to us anyway. So why are we doing this? Why don't we say we like the design? We have no position on the legal issue. You guys do what you're going to do.
Corinne?
I don't have any further comments to add.
I mean, I'd have to agree with Steve, but it does seem like we're getting more and more of these on the side of buildings. They're stuck everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for my part, the fact that I would feel differently about this if it said Google or Facebook tells me that it is an exception that I'm not comfortable recommending.
Thank you.
And because once we start, determining who's allowed to advertise up there and what the content is, we're in very uncomfortable place. That said, I don't disagree that it is an attractive rendering, but I am not comfortable recommending this because my opinion on it changes depending on who it is. Yeah. Yes.
One comment to that is that you're correct on that it's who is the sign for. In a hotel use, this sign, I believe would be allowed if this was a hotel.
But that's what the law says.
Right. So
right.
they make, so there is some, right, you're right.
Right.
There's some distinction for the hotel use.
Yeah.
So.
And that's sort of on the wayfinding rationale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But.
Yeah.
All right, so
what do you think?
Did the BZA ask us for an opinion on this, or was it just us who were curious? We volunteered, so maybe we
because
just
the
leave it to
planning
them.
board was so active in the zoning and the creation and the various amendments for the sign regulations, traditionally the planning board has reviewed and or commented or not about signs, but they're almost always brought to the planning board for comment.
So do we, given that I would say we're at best mixed on this, do we want to offer a recommendation, or do we want? It is perfectly acceptable for us not to recommend, not to forward a recommendation of any kind.
Or do you want to take a vote and then just pass on what the vote was?
I don't know.
I think they really want to know the why rather than.
Yeah,
what.
the numbers.
Yeah, and
I guess I don't have problems. I mean, we could say nothing, but I don't have problems doing sort of what Steve is saying, is that the sign is attractive, but we don't think it complies with the ordinance, and don't think that, you know,
Period.
that's all, you know. It doesn't comply with the ordinance, but it is attractive.
All right.
You don't think the hardship is sufficient?
The word, that is their judgment to
Right,
make.
that's theirs.
And this is very similar to a recommendation that went for a building that's in Kendall Square.
Okay.
Okay.
Why don't we take a vote on that we'll forward a recommendation acknowledging that we think it is an attractive application, but that we don't think it meets the ordinance. All right, although.
Can I amend
Yeah,
it?
well-
How about simply that we think it's an attractive sign, and it's up to them to make the determination on the.
I wouldn't forward that. So if we want to forward a consensus statement, we're going to say both.
Well, clearly it doesn't apply to,
Yeah.
according to the ordinance, so that's fine, we're just stating the obvious.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, so.
Could we phrase it by saying, we can't recommend it because it doesn't conform to
Right.
the ordinance?
Oh, I like that.
Well, you don't like that.
Yeah, well, that's a negative recommendation. I'd rather just say, we like the sign, and this is what the ordinance says, and you guys figure it out, rather than recommending against passage or variance.
Yes, Jeff.
Can I just say one? Because there was a comment that a few planning board members made. I don't know if it was something that you wanted to have articulated in any recommendation. I think the concern that was raised wasn't necessarily whether it complied or not. It needs a variance, so it doesn't comply. With a question, I think the concern was about precedent that was raised. So I don't. Just as a thought, is that something that board members would want to include as a concern?
They already gave a variance for the EF sign, didn't they?
Somebody did.
Yeah.
And you know.
We have given similar variances.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
And, everybody is concerned about precedent on these things, but, this isn't the federal court where precedent is binding. I mean, we make judgments based on what comes before us.
Maybe they might want to know that most people, not most, but some, don't want to see a lot more of these signs constantly.
That's the precedent.
I feel like we're getting further away from something we can vote on rather than closer.
We don't need to vote on anything. We can just leave the discussion.
Or we could simply tell them nothing.
Yeah, that's it.
Let's tell them nothing.
Or again, just you take a vote. X number of people favored it, and why you didn't do it. We're going to ignore us anyway.
All right. I'm hearing from some people, let's just say nothing. I'm hearing loudly from Steve. They don't that they they don't pay any attention to us. So let's just say it's pretty and.
No, seriously, we'd like the sign, and
I
somehow
don't
or
disagree
another
with
we'd
it.
like to at least convey that.
Yeah, does that give it a positive? No.
Just somebody frame a motion. Let's move on. Come on.
Yeah,
Just frame a
I
motion,
mean,
somebody.
my sense here is we don't have enough of a consensus on what we want to say to the BZA to form a motion that could get support enough to pass. So I think we're going to remain silent on this
No
one.
comment.
Yep.
Okay.
Moving on.
Thank you very
Yep.
much.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Well, you can tell them that a lot of us liked it.
No, or that Steve did anyway.
Steve likes
Thanks for hearing us.
Yeah, right, I'll do that.
All right. So we have one other sign that we've been asked to take a look at, which is the St. Paul's Choir School. Liza, what is the choir school?
So, at 29 Mount Auburn Street is the St. Paul's Choir School, and one of the features of the choir school is a tower.
Okay.
And when the building was originally designed and constructed, their design included a sign area on the building. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to pinpoint when the building was constructed, this particular building. So I don't know I can't tell you what the sign ordinance was at that time, whether or not it would have required a variance.
Does now.
It does now. When the building was built, they didn't put up the sign. So they have,
Yeah, it's been a while.
well, but I need to have, I need more of a date because it's changes to the ordinance. So
Is it just that one sign?
that's
That
one
location?
sign that they're requesting. It has been to the Historical Commission. The Historical Commission reviewed it, and they don't find it
Congress.
Yes, thank you. I knew there was a word there. With the design of the building. They don't have a problem with any of the other features. Excuse me. But they do want to have two things. One is the text must be underneath the logo, and two is that they will review the final construction set. So I don't know if you want to send a comment on this or not. The Harvard Square Advisory Committee declined to meet about it, but the people who responded, which was about 5 of the members, said they supported it and they thought it was a good idea.
Well, other than the fact that I like the choir school and I like the stuff that they do, and a number of their concerts, this is exactly why we don't have permit signs. You know, I see no argument for this sign.
Especially showing you the
Steve, I'm going to cancel you out again. You cancel me.
So you're saying that
So-
the lettering, the St. Paul's choir school
Goes underneath
letters are
the
now moving
historical.
down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is what I think it
But
shows on the
this-
next page.
This sign also actually faces church property, right? It doesn't
Yes.
face a public way.
Overlooking the courtyard.
Their courtyard,
Right,
right?
the courtyard is where they have temporary parking, so it's overlooking the courtyard. It's visible from off-site, the project.
So they're just talking to themselves, exactly.
Yeah. So.
Well, I wish they would be whispering.
We'll say the rendering doesn't do them any favors on
No,
this.
the rendering's-
Hugh?
If the concerns are that we have to pick and choose based on the content of the sign and the character of the owner, then we should do the same with this as we did with the
I agree with
previous
that.
one.
Yes.
Even though I think it's fine.
I think it's fine too. I agree. That's fair.
But we'll
Thank you.
refrain from comment there as well. All right. We have no other business tonight, yes?
Yes.
All right. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Peanut gallery down here.